The 25th Ward, The Silver Case is the direct sequel to the first game that the Grasshopper manufacturer developed in order to establish the company. If you haven't seen my analyses on that 1999 PlayStation game, the 2001 PS2 sorta sequel known as Flower, Sun, and Rain, or played all three of these games yourself, I suggest you do so before watching my analysis on the 25th Ward, or Ward 25 as it was called in Japan, I think. Directed by Suda51, who these days is better known for games like No More Heroes and Shadows of the Damned. Originally for mobile phones exclusively in said country, it was released piecemeal in episodic format, the first episode hitting Japan back in October of 2005. There's very little information regarding the original mobile game, considered lost media for years. However, someone that goes by Nanami recovered their old cell phone that still has all the episodes they purchased in playable form and uploaded full playthroughs of the chapters. From what I understand, the first 4 episodes of each scenario were written and released by the end of 2006, and the 5th episode of each scenario wasn't released until 2008, as Suda initially wanted the game to be re-released with said new episodes on DS, which I believe was planned for a worldwide release. However, that plan fell through, keeping the whole series on mobile phones and still only in Japan. So, the original project, directed by Suda51, was completed not only after Killer 7 released, but during the production of No More Heroes, with the 5th episode of each scenario not releasing until months after that Wii game launched. Confusing, I know, but it's neat to think about how these crime thriller tales were still swimming in Suda's head when he likely didn't realize his world and perspective on the industry would forever be mutated by a bloodthirsty dork rocking the faux hawk. But back to what was going on in Japan. The Silver Case in 1999 was met with pretty good sales, well, good enough to reach Sony's greatest hits threshold, and Flower, Sun, and Rain was an early entrance into the next generation at the time. That game had a lot more going on with its immediate visuals compared to the Silver Case, and it's hard to say if the PlayStation 2 would have been the best platform to continue that world easily. Supposedly, Suda saw mobile phones at the time to be more viable with how he wanted to tell the story, and keep the production small, as they were either finishing up Killer 7's long production timeline and or starting development on No More Heroes. While Flower, Sun, and Rain, the preceding title to the 25th Ward, saw this world present itself with full 3D models and in-engine animation, this installment goes even simpler than either game, resorting back to the original format, but without any 3D capabilities, only drawn backgrounds and virtually no animation. This, in turn, meant the 2018 remake would feel similar to the Silver Case's own remake. This was so the game would be more true to the original experience, but enhanced in various ways. So, what's the premise? Years have passed since the end of the Silver Case, and at some point after Flower, Sun, and Rain, the world has entered a new millennium, and Japan a new way of life. No longer are we a simple police force chasing a sole criminal or trying to learn about individuals and their goals. This all-new, colder team donning the Heinous Crimes Unit title is attempting to solve the mysteries of the just as new, just as cold 25th Ward that has embraced the dystopian way of future living more than the rest of the world. It is now rampant with espionage and threats to civil well-being that these wards have never seen before. Or has seen, and it just wasn't as big of a deal, but now are a big deal. Huh. In this game, we've got 3 main stories to follow. Correctness, written by Suda51, follows the new HCU that I mentioned before. Matchmaker, written by Masahiro Yuki, follows 2 members of this underground organization known as the Regional Adjustment Bureau. And Placebo, once again written by Masahi Uka, returns along with Tokyo as the main character. No longer a drawn-out explanation of what's happening within the main story, Tokyo's endeavors have much more of their own agency and don't really coincide with what's going on with the rest of the cast as much as the Silver Case's parallel scenarios did. It crosses paths with the other 2 stories, but not often. This time, Tokyo is more his own character with unique struggles and triumphs. Makes sense considering his character development near the end of the Silver Case, along with his appearance in Flower, Sun, and Rain. Suda51 was once again the sole director of this episodic game, but I can't find anything that states how much influence he had outside of Correctness. Each story has their own writer, their own composer, well, for the remake, and their own visual artist in order to fully emphasize how different these stories are from each other. Like before, different perspectives. Spoilers from here on out. If you haven't played the 25th Ward yet, I suggest you do so before continuing. With that last warning, let's move on. To describe the 25th Ward and what kind of experience it provides is difficult. Even more difficult than Killer 7, believe it or not. I cannot confidently describe the kind of vibe this game is going for. It's cool and funny at times, but will suddenly take a turn for the disturbing faster than you can twist your neck. It combines the hard-boiled feel of the Silver Case while merging it with the absurd nature of Flower, Sun, and Rain. Not to say the Silver Case didn't get absurd, but this game takes it to a whole new level, all while driving this ward into an absolute nightmare that only deforms more and more as you progress. It almost feels like I should be playing this game out by the water, in the middle of the night, with only the gusty winds to keep me company. The sheer existence of this game is pretty unique. You know how whenever anyone talks about a remake, there's always contention and arguments whether or not it lives up to the original? Some might already know how much bias I have against video game remakes in general. Even the darling choice being Resident Evil. The 2002 remake is awesome. It's so sick and provides an amazing experience. But I still play the original game more. Hell, even getting into the Yakuza series, I started with 0 because I'm an idiot, but as friends came to learn that, they told me once I finished this, I should just get into the respective remakes of 1 and 2, aka the Kiwami games. But that didn't sit right with me. I understand they're made under the same engine as Yakuza 0, so they'd be easy for me to slip right into, but I didn't want these Kiwami remakes to be my first experience of playing the entirety of Yakuza 1 and 2, so I'm playing the PS2 games instead. That's just how much I stand by this principle, as I usually, pretty much always, prefer the original game to just about any straightforward remake, so why would this be any different? With that, I've got to enjoy the original game in its badly dubbed glory.
How many times I gotta tell you, I'm not Yakuza. You retarded or just deaf?
Oh my god! However, I can't really dissect or analyze that aspect very much, since there's still no way for anyone to play the original Ward 25 on ancient cell phones from Japan. Except that one person. There are those uploads, but I'm not going to base playing the game from watching YouTube videos. Also, I can't read Japanese. So it's understandable that Suda himself likes to think of this remake as a brand new game altogether, since most of the people in the market for this never got a chance to play the original as it is.
The 25th Ward is a game that could be called Grasshopper's Buried Treasure, as there's currently no way to play it. For this remake, or shall I say revival, it was approached as though it were an entirely new visual novel, and we see it as an opportunity for people to play it as a brand new Grasshopper title. As for meaning, this release means that the world of the Silver Case will continue.
Just about all the elements of said remake, including the menus and presentation, were directed by Nobutaka Ichiki, who some might recognize as the director of No More Heroes 2. And apparently his first job in the company was working on the original Ward 25. I have to say, his direction brought some great visual flair that fit with this cold, unwelcoming world very well. Taking inspiration from art sculptor Anthony Gormley. Am I saying that right? I also think getting Ichiki to direct the remake is a good idea, since he might have some insight on how Suda and the writers wanted this game to be presented back in the mid-2000s, but held back due to old mobile phone limitations. Also, Suda was probably too busy with Travis Strikes Again. With Nanami's recent efforts providing the original 4 chapters of each story through recording their phone screen, I can at least make a few observations regarding the original mobile game and the remake. Much of the art made for this game back in the mid-2000s can now be presented in full resolution. I'm not sure who archived their original artwork, whether it was Grasshopper Manufacture or the artists themselves, but I give props since now they can be seen in their full glory and not on a tiny cell phone screen. What were originally drawn backdrops are fully recreated and animated in 3D. Well, when they're actually animated. And I think it's safe to say the remake likely accentuates the situations more clearly and satisfactorily than a mid-2000s cell phone could. There's even some parts of the game expanded upon now that it's utilizing a console's game engine. However, the visuals of the background feel fairly lifeless and drab compared to the Silver Case, as well as its 2016 remake. Although that could just be part of the art direction, depicting this cold, dying world. Ward. 25th Ward. Of course, part of the presentation falls short due to the lack of animated sequences and FMVs. The silver case was created for the PlayStation. That disc-based console was capable of these types of presentations. The 25th Ward, however, was only for mobile phones. Therefore, there are no FMVs nor traditionally animated sequences to utilize for the remake. We still get some real-time animation here and there, but it's very minimal stuff. On one hand, I wish they did go the extra mile and add some new animated sequences in order for it to more closely resemble the silver case and that game's console experience. But on the other hand, I understand they wanted to keep this generally close to the original mobile game besides a few liberties. Or maybe it was a budget issue, I don't know. I also wish the original music was featured somewhere in this remake as well. Masafumi Takada composed the soundtrack in the original release of the game's episodes, but for the remake, the entire soundtrack consists of mostly original tracks with 3 main composers who worked exclusively on their appointed stories. Well, as far as I know. Akira Yamaoka for Correctness, Bayon for Matchmaker, and Erika Ito for Placebo, with Takada composing 2 new tracks as a guest artist. Most of the original mobile game's music is considered lost media, like the actual game, as we only recently got to hear them through Nanami's uploads. Some of the songs were pretty faithfully recreated, while others were completely new for this remake. Which I understand, as a lot of the original tracks were simply from the silver case, retranslated for mobile phones. With that said, some scenarios really have completely different vibes, and that's just from the music choice alone. Still, it would have been nice to implement them somewhere in this remake, as Takada is the master and was able to make those little phones sing back in the day. Even if they can't properly carry the remake's presentation, I, along with many other Grasshopper fans, just want those original tracks. I even said as much to James Mountain, Grasshopper's main interpreter and localizer, in an interview I conducted with him back in 2023.
I could ask about that actually. Like I said, I'm pretty sure there's no original hardware to play it on, but as far as the data itself goes, I mean, they had the text files to be localized and stuff. There's a chance that they may have like the sound files and stuff as well somewhere.
It's been a couple years, but I guess you never know. Make a soundtrack CD and put it on your online store, huh? That kind of exclusivity will get fans throwing their credit cards directly at the monitor like Gambit. Not to say the new tracks aren't fire, a lot of them certainly are. Speaking as someone that was not wild about how Yamaoka and Ito remixed certain tracks from the original game, they made some incredible songs for this remake that will never leave my brain. Hot take, his contributions to this game are the last great entries Yamaoka has made in his career thus far. He left Grasshopper immediately after this project, by the way. Speaking more on the presentation, it's mostly the same as the silver case, but they've made a noticeable amount of changes. The layout and menus are completely different, and the gameplay is much simpler. Rarely are you expected to walk around and explore the area on your own. In fact, you're usually railroaded throughout, and the only agency you'll ever have is how quickly, or slowly, you figure out certain situations. You can move and use items like in the PS1 game, but even that's much simpler as you can't look around freely. Everything is a section you have to dedicate yourself to. The actions, look, and talk are pretty much the same as they both strike conversations, usually one-sided with the present characters. Everything feels much more simplified, which might be a byproduct of this game originally intended for mobile phones and not an actual game console. In fact, no duh, you can't look around, the original game was strictly 2D. To set up a bit of the 25th Ward and tell you where Suda's head was when creating this game, a lot of inspiration came from Tokyo, quickly evolving into this large, technologically advanced city. The area also saw a stock market boom in the mid-2000s as online trading became the norm, industrial level productions expanded as they increased exportation business, and all of this essentially reshaped the face of Tokyo, Japan as this neon, futuristic, bustling city.
While we were writing and developing the 25th Ward, Tokyo was in the process of transforming into a huge city, and foreign companies were building up offices and subsequently residential areas along the bay. A new city, a new local government. How would these things affect people? Also, how would the people who newly lived here be distorted, and what kind of crimes would occur? With these thoughts in mind, the 25th Ward took shape.
Before we go over the story, I do want to state I'll be looking at the 25th Ward pretty similarly to how I analyze the Silver Case and Flower, Sun, and Rain. However, I'll probably fall into tangents as we go through these chapters. Anyone that has played these games can tell you the 25th Ward, most of all, has so much going on beat for beat. When it came to the Silver Case and FSR, I described what happened in these chapters, then analyzed the overall stories within said chapters. But for the 25th Ward, I feel the need to discuss the events as they hit us because there's just so much to talk about. I do still give some breakdowns at the end of each chapter though. I'll also be looking at each story separately because, as I said before, Placebo has much more of its own agency this time around, and Matchmaker is also just as unique from the other two stories. Because of this, I've decided to turn this into a 4-part series, one for each side of the entire story, and an extra video discussing what was added in the remake, as well as closing statements. I also want to give a very special thanks to the folks that helped me dissect this game as a whole and have long discussions with aspects of the story, or for being a good resource to better understand the culture the game was written around. My script wouldn't be half as good without the help of these folks. Big thanks to Adrian VG, Expert Killer 7 and No More Hero Speedrunner, check out his Twitch channel. Big thanks to Macrophones, he does his own long-form essays, both video and text. His gigantic analysis on Kamui as a character and how it affects nearly the entire Grasshopper library is especially enthralling. Big thanks to Colin, who discussed a lot of the aspects of Matchmaker with me along with the relationships of the characters. He does great art, which you'll see in the next video. And one more big thanks to Steelball Runner. His Twitter is basically a treasure trove of various Grasshopper game lore and references as he's an avid fan. This video is part 1 and will specifically focus on Correctness, the 5-episode series that was written by Suda51 himself. With that, we're finally getting into the game. The intro movie is wildly different from the Silver Case, and the remakes for that matter. It's slower, doesn't really fly at you with a speeding highway of visuals like before. Instead, it eases you into this mute, cold-forming city as you see bits of information depicting these senses of elitism, violence, and structure. Gives me the vibes of a more cyberpunkish setting, which is somewhat fitting. And listen to that background music. This rough, dirty bass sounding like a rotten heartbeat with distorted scratches and chord twangs, adding to the discord of it all. This intro has a ton of style, much more refined and perhaps even confident with its vibe. Dissimilar to the Silver Case, the original 25th Ward had no introduction video, so this was firstly made for the remake. You'll come to learn that the shiny new 25th Ward isn't bustling or thriving in any sort of way. The city is much quieter, more stagnant, but also more sinister. As we hit New Game, we see the title itself transform before our eyes. The shapes that made up the name take on a humanistic form. Taking control, we walk forward and see this huge triangle, each corner making up for the 3 aspects of the story we discussed earlier. You're really seeing the Gormley inspiration here. No need to make a name this time around, let us begin. The game starts with an immediate declaration that the past is not dead, which already sets up for a more nihilistic tone. Despite what transpired throughout the Silver Case, the people have not been liberated from the cycle of crime, dehumanization, and death. An appropriate video game trope. How else do you start a sequel but with the proclamation that your previous efforts were for naught? Despite the actions of Tetsugoro Kusabi in the Silver Case, the past has not been killed. It's been 25 or 30 years since the 24 Wards project began. Yes, the year count is not definite. This is the redevelopment project they started shortly after the Mikumo incident, which Tetsu claims started in 1979. That would make this game take place around 2009, but other points state the year is 2005, so I don't know. This line about economic rebirth at the hands of the chosen people is likely referring to the Shelter Kids project, as more years have passed regarding these children being let out onto Japan to lead adult lives. As I've described before, the goal of this project was to create a perfect utopia of controlled citizens, but it sounds like those in charge have given up on this ever coming to fruition. In the end, much of the 24 Wards was riddled with crime and resistance. From how it's described in this prologue, it appears the 24th Ward itself became annexed and a more prevalent side of criminality grew after the death of Kamui Uehara during the events of the Silver Case. Their response? Create a new 25th Ward in order to attempt building a utopia once again, calling the 24th Ward a test sample of sorts. The new 25th Ward is much closer to what they wanted to achieve. As the game states, this region is hygienically immaculate and its society is considered non-communalistic. In other words, it runs on a sense of holism rather than individualism or small groups. And so our story begins. This is Prototype. We see a man in shades and then get a gaze of these huge towers that look like something out of a server room. It's October 3rd and we're at the seaside area of the 25th Ward. The man in shades is Kosaka from the Silver Case. While still working with the Heinous Crimes Unit, or HCU, he seems to be part of a more powerful yet more discreet squad. He's addressing us, but we're not Blakira from the original game, rather an empty vessel of a male character that we play through, except for the frequent moments the game frivolously abandons him. Unlike the 1999 title, this intro doesn't get too caught up with throwbacks or obscured ends to previous video games the company doesn't have any rights to. It's just a straightforward introduction that nicely presents the cold, looming world of the 25th Ward and a handful of its characters, while also describing the game's controls, which are pretty simple. Kosaka describes this string of strange deaths occurring in the Bayside Towers, a condominium complex that, according to him, was only recently opened. With that said, 9 deaths already reported in this building is especially bizarre, but all appearing as suicides makes it even stranger. Although, from how he describes it, they weren't able to confirm that themselves, as this is a very secluded community of sorts. In other words, these deaths have been obscured, rendering it difficult to investigate, only managing to find a lead on the 75th floor. We're being ordered to move in and meet up with the other partners of our headquarters. Kosaka gives us some tutorial bits and then goes on to describe what he calls administrative crime. He states that these obscured deaths being so inconclusive and lack of media coverage proves someone of higher power is involved in all of this. As in, they are intentionally leaving the press out in order to frame the narrative themselves. Well, let's move on in then. Huh? We're not done? Well, then hurry up already! Kosaka also tells us a bit more about the 25th Ward. This region was granted fruition after the governing bodies saw the 24th Ward's supposed success and are dedicated to building this utopia that houses about 300,000 people. That's a population count for many average-sized cities in the US, just to give some perspective. Ending this introduction, Kosaka gives us a fake ID for entry, which I thought was odd at first since you'd think they'd have some sort of authority to simply barge in as fascistic groups do, but realized they're likely working undercover so as to not alert anyone working in this complex and have them cover up the only lead they've managed to get. Anyway, we're off to our first investigation. At the front desk, we present the door boy our ID card, and we Gucci. Stewart here goes on about the perfect sense of sanitation in this building, calling living here better than reality. If you say so. We solve the puzzle that is hitting the number 75. Like I said, the puzzles are more often than not little tests to ensure you're paying attention. Cool shapes. Look at that one down there. Heading towards the apartment room, we run into a familiar face. Sakura! I guess she's still part of the heinous crimes unit as well. She tells us to forget about the concept of facts as we know it. Her spiel here kind of reminds me of what Tetsu told her and Blakira back in the Silver Case, which is interesting. Speaking of, she says our character reminds us of him. No doubt referring to Blakira. Once we get into the apartment, she notes how cold and sterile the room feels. I don't know, just looks like the backdrop of your typical rich YouTube vlogger or Twitch streamer. As we take in the crime scene, there's an egregiously large blood spatter across the wall and ceiling, as well as a woman's corpse sitting on the computer chair. Sakura tells us our priority is to kill crime itself, which is like a bite-sized version of Tetsu's monologue at the end of the Silver Case's prologue. People like Kosaka apparently see a strong potential in our character. Honestly, the comparison between both prologues can go on. Ending this small chapter, she states Kamui will kill the life. Perhaps the lion has once again awakened. Punk rock, with the colon at the end there. Like before, we'll try to analyze the chapter through the lead that is the song title reference ending each chapter. For what it's worth, the original mobile version did not have any song titles ending their chapters, so these song titles are new for the remake, likely to align more consistently with the Silver Case, which this serves as a direct sequel to. The chapter is called Prototype, a word defined as a preliminary model usually regarding a machine. So an introduction to the 25th Ward itself, and the title can even imply that this isn't really a town, but a machine meant to run a certain way, a society that's supposed to act the way those of higher power expect them to. So yeah, good name for an introduction. Anyway, as I started writing this portion, I pulled up a video to take in the song Punk Rock : and wow, will you look at that? Of course, Suda. Of fucking course. The first song, too. Just like how we saw the moon shine in the prologue chapter of the Silver Case, it's almost like this was his way of showing it off, as the majority of the 25th Ward takes place during the day instead of night this time around. Besides Mogwai's Punk Rock : being the first song reference for this game, this band also takes up 5 of the 20 end chapter titles, more than any other for this game. Anyway, the song itself is desolate and lugubrious. You can hear the sadness and feel the darkness in that quiet guitar. The song also samples an infamous interview by Iggy Pop, lead singer of the Stooges. While he's considered an iconic piece of punk rock history, he rambles about how much he hates the term punk rock in this interview.
I'll tell you about punk rock. Punk rock is a word used by dilettantes and heartless manipulators about music that takes up the energies and the bodies and the hearts and the souls and the time and the minds of young men who give what they have to it. It's a term that's based on contempt, fashion, style, elitism, Satanism, and everything that's rotten about rock and roll.
The whole thing is interesting to me since it's being so boldly referenced in this remake. Suda himself always called Grasshopper Manufacture a video game band, and a lot of people certainly like to label him as a punk rock game developer, and there's a conversation to be had if the kinds of games the company developed fit that label. But there's a never-ending dispute about what it even means to be punk rock, so what's really the point in debating that? Having said that, Iggy Pop's cheered rambling is about how the label is complete bullshit, and how it's a part of this corporate effort to essentially suck the soul out of the musicians that were taking the world by storm and monopolizing them. Kinda makes me think of that scene with Damien at the end of No More Heroes 3.
I hate punks. They're violent, evil psychos.
This elitist, this meek capitalist that hates what he does not understand, throwing that label so easily. Anyway, this also makes me think about how Suda during this time was getting pigeonholed into labels. Like I said, people were calling him a punk rock game developer, so much so that there were scathing articles written about how he isn't really that punk, but Suda never called himself that. Not as far as I can tell. He obviously loves punk rock, but that isn't really the same as calling yourself punk. I don't think punks call themselves punk, right? I don't know, whatever. Suda was also in a quandary during this time, as a lot of people were labeling grasshoppers having sexual and erotic themes in their games, something he didn't consent to and, as far as I can tell, did not like.
There was a strong request from our publisher to include sexy female characters. We had just finished an earlier project, Lollipop Chainsaw, and I really didn't want there to be this image of grasshopper equals erotic.
He has said time and again that this era had him lose himself as a game developer while Grasshopper was getting swamped up with huge projects before he started making moves to take his company back in a matter of sorts, starting with the Silver Case remake project. So here it is, tapping the audience with this song. Maybe he's trying to tell us something, just like the song giving attention to this interview. The colon in the title is inferring that they're going to describe and define something to us. Perhaps Mogwai is describing that being punk rock is to reject punk rock, as in the label. So maybe in a way, Suda is being punk by also choosing to reject such notions about his studio, his body of work, and the labels people try to put on Grasshopper Manufacture. But I don't know, maybe it's not supposed to be taken so personally. Trying to connect this with the beginnings of the 25th Ward, the instrumentals themselves already give this melancholic, almost lifeless, decaying aura, much like this manufactured society that's mutating faster than the heinous crimes unit can comprehend. And Iggy Pop's ramblings also relate to these powerful elites that have a strong contempt for something they cannot control, they cannot monopolize and fully take advantage of. In other words, the criminal mindset. But we've only just begun learning what's going on in the 25th Ward. As the chapter begins, I can only assume this is the same high-rise apartment at night, but perhaps it doesn't have to be. A single light is on in a room, and we see what looks like a large, filled garbage bag flung out to land on the concrete. We then see what looks like a futuristic armored soldier lighting up their visor. Someone on the ground floor holding what may be that large bag under the moonlight. This is New World Order. October 3rd, same day as the prologue, as we're continuing the investigation that is just getting started. A man named Hatoba is here to talk with Kosaka. They mention the funeral of Sakaguchi, remember him? The central police advisor back in the Silver Case. Old Afro's passed away, I guess. Kosaka talks like he can't help but dwell in the past, a trait that I find peculiar. He also says he works for the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. From how they talk about it, they seem to be of higher power than the Heinous Crimes Unit, much like the group he worked for back in the Silver Case. While still involved in certain investigations, most of his job responsibilities are closer to a regular office gig. Hatoba mentions an administrative officer that's been putting together an undercover investigation team, and there's a feeling of death in the air. Getting back to the actual apartment investigation, we're here with two new characters, Shiroyabu and Sakaki, talking about another recent death in this complex. The victim's name was Kosuke Kurumizawa, who worked as an administrator for the building. No family, no recorded history, all they've got is a name. He was a man that kept to himself. They can't even find where he's from, as information about this person is strangely scarce, almost like he didn't really exist in this world. Sakaki says the only thing they've got is the coroner confirming he consumed a lot of human female hair. Shiriyabu says something peculiar here, that his old mentor told him a crime where personal information goes missing is an abnormal crime. He runs into our character as we all head back to the crime scene. Sakaki mentions how largely in demand these condos were, getting about 1 million applicants for available rooms. The two talk about how lifeless the whole place feels though. Shiriyabu posits this kind of life is desired by those who feel alone in this world, those without a sense of community or society. Shiriyabu notes how the lifelessness of this place only encourages the thriving of a crime virus of sorts. As they head inside, they state how the corpse doesn't show any sign of injury, so why the excess blood? Next thing we know, a salty-tongued woman is here to berate us. Jabroni. That's you fucking jabroni. As they investigate, it seems pretty clear they don't know our characters undercover, using the guise of a building manager is actually working. They talk about Kuroyanagi for a bit. The Japanese Dirty Harry. She plays by her own rules. Foul-mouthed, angry, can hit me with her fucking car and I'll still apologize. Jabroni feels this whole crime scene is a setup, deducing how this can't be the victim's blood. The coroner, Hiruka, who's apparently here too, confirms this notion that the blood spatter is not realistic. This also makes the possibility of suicide non-existent, adding to the mysterious nature of these deaths. As they try to collect themselves, Sakaki gets a little too close to the lights and... whatever this weapon is, it seems to easily pierce through flesh, as a single laser is going right through Sakaki's entire body, killing her immediately. We cut to Kosaka outside, stating how we're all mindless dolls that will always fall in line with a controlled system. He's lamenting that everything is happening again.
You're awake from your dream.
It seems like he's giving orders to soldiers, but who? With that said, he gives the order to kill the life. Familiar words. With that, the entire building blacks out. Back at the crime scene, Kuroyanagi commands us to head to the upper floor to find the goon that just killed Sakaki. On our way, the elevator gets stuck. Dude, we're sharing this room. We're really getting a look at how much of a jabroni is too. Pathetic, whiny shitheel only bitching when his superiors aren't around. He's like a kid trapped in a man's body. Jabroni calls him a mailman. Perhaps these are their uniforms. Wearing the same helmet we saw earlier, it looks like the only parcel he has for us is an overnight shipment of death! The disgruntled soldier trying to go postal on us claims they're what keeps the 25th Ward in line. Huh. Fully suited postal service worker with deadly lasers, like...
But first, I need some time to get ready. Would you mind turning the other way? I need some privacy.
All right.
Huh. He describes the police and possibly the HCU as some lackey cleanup crew. I guess the postal service workers are the ones more involved in trying to diminish the crime virus now. She berates Jabroni for not acting as he lumps on excuses that just remind me of Mac from Sunny in Philly. And she ain't having none of that. As we all hit the 76th floor, an army of mailmen are awaiting us. They order our character to hide as they get ready to take on these postal goons all on their own. After that action movie buildup, they're ready to lay waste. Kosaka confirms the mission has been completed. He states a number of casualties, as well as the survival of 3 HCU members, of course. This mysterious other end tells Kosaka about our character's potential criminal prowess. But who was there to notice this? Doesn't sound like Jabroni or Kuroyanagi. Kosaka leers at the giant skyscraper, assuring us he will find Uehara. Later that night, we head back inside with Sakura, handing us access to the top floor VIP room in order to meet with someone expecting us. We enter this amazing room with a view of the entire city. A man in red greets us, named Kenshiro Nakane. He describes the 25th Ward as his own toy box. He loves the feeling of power, the feeling of control over an entire city and the population. Nakane describes the purpose of such tall buildings. They're symbols of power among the world, symbols of status, and he feels he's reached the absolute top of that ranking. Nakane says he has taken control of the 25th Ward. He wants this place to become the utopia he envisions, criticizing the act of child kidnapping, possibly referring to the Shelter Kids program. I think he's bringing it up since that program had a similar goal. However, Nakane thinks this requires a different approach. He considers that limiting resources to people is what will get them in line. It sounds like he's the one that privatized the postal service system, severely downsizing as he bought them. Typical process when companies are bought out. He intends to create a powerful society in the 25th Ward that will be able to control much of Japan's political power. It sounds like he's also been tapping for support from politicians frustrated with Japan's current ideals. He describes that many of the citizens transferred to the 25th Ward were unwanted citizens from the other parts of Japan. Mass deportations to start filling up this near lifeless city. Nakane also says the least desired must be weeded out. Very fascistic beliefs. He really does see this town and the people as his playthings. He says this is the purpose of the current HCU, a team of cleaners, if you will. With that said, Nakane wants our help, having our character work under a certain name, and what other name but Kamui Uehara. He says that name should already be burned into our head, but why is that? What does that name mean, this guise of a serial killer? 2 days pass, and Hatoba and Kosaka are talking about the 50 listed suicides, which he's privy to their unfounded nature. He comments that the police aren't even properly investigating these scenes. He tells Kosaka he knows about the Postal Service monitoring these buildings and possibly behind these deaths. This talk makes you think the two aren't actually supposed to communicate, strongly inferring the likes of the HCU and Postal Service are not to cooperate. I mean, that's obvious now. Kosaka states the ministry is planning some sort of clean house strategy on the entire ward though. Hatoba says the HCU might not cooperate, which the two dread the idea of having to fight to the end if it comes to that. Thus ending our first actual chapter. Travel is dangerous. Now that we're really getting into the original story Suda started writing back in 2005, I feel the need to express something that was revealed in a 2023 interview. Among all 3 writers for the 25th Ward, Suda wrote each of his within a day. Kind of insane, as this speaks for how much his stories within the game reflect on his headspace at the time. This tells me that what he's expressing in these chapters weren't exactly parts of his childhood or his past that were stewing in his head for some time, but more likely reflective on his immediate thoughts, concerns, and even fears, where his mind was in the mid-2000s. I also posit that some elements will relate closely to the other productions being worked on during this time, but let's not jump ahead. Frankly, we already did for a second there. I decided that's how I'm going to look over these chapters written by Suda himself, a supposed reflection on what's going on in the society around him, or events. With that said, the title of the chapter, New World Order, makes me hope it's not just a reference to NWO. Frankly, the term's been around long before that, defining a point in time where the balance of international political power drastically changed, usually when the world would see an end to huge conflicts such as the Cold War. However, New World Order is also an ongoing conspiracy about totalitarian world government plotting to rule the world, in a sense. Quiet elites influencing governing bodies to do their bidding as they gain more power. You know, like ELBO, the secret political/business organization mentioned in both The Silver Case and Flower, Sun, and Rain. The concept of ELBO supports the idea of something like a New World Order, as the factions in The Silver Case all served ELBO, ultimately. I recall hearing about this conspiracy back in the late 90s, and it stayed prevalent throughout the 2000s, fueling this conspiracy as the term found its way into lyrics to hit songs, usually with no real context. It's a fringe conspiracy as it is, but I think this is related to characters both hidden and exposed, such as Nakane, who is in fact an elite with this desire to control the 25th Ward. And surely, his lust for power wouldn't stop there.
登場界が力で光り輝かせるこの街に、私は風穴を開ける人間です。こんな風にね。金は力。私は自分の力がこの先どこまで登場界に迫れるか試してみたい。
So, with the HCU going barrel to barrel against the Postal Service, one might be asking, wait, why is there an army of mailmen? And why are they the bad guys? Funny enough, I submitted this question to Suda for a Q&A session he conducted with James Mountain, and his answer is a bit dissatisfying. I get it. He wrote this stuff like 2 decades ago at this point and was working on multiple projects throughout the 25th Ward's development. And similar to The Silver Case, he was likely influenced by politics or events going on during the time of writing these games. This makes it a little hard for me to learn what kinds of things were going on for Japan since I didn't live there, but I'm lucky to know Steel Ball Runner, who pointed me in the right direction. With that, I need to talk about Japan Post. Japan Post was a corporation that only lasted a few years, establishing itself in April of 2003. This company specialized in various services, but prioritized postal and package delivery. This company was to essentially replace the original Postal Service agency as an initial effort to privatize the entire postal service for Japan. That country's postal service before 2003 was government owned, like it is here in the United States, as of this recording. Japan Post was set to have said service be bought out by certain corporations instead. This was a divisive movement, finding opposition as well as support across the country. Trying my best to scrunch up this Wikipedia article, I don't live in Japan, get off my back, some argued it would create a more efficient parcel service, while others said it would kill many jobs for hardworking people, as these buyouts typically do. Citizens in general opposed how Prime Minister at the time, Junichiro Koizumi, was going about this privatization, smelling corruption in his moves. So why is privatizing something like the Postal Service considerably bad? For better or for worse, this service as a government-owned entity means it was not dependent on profits in order to function, and did not have any sort of bias towards where it delivered its postages, parcels, and what have yous. Disregarding inevitable human error, the point is that the Postal Service worked for you regardless of your address. Does that make sense? Okay. So the idea of privatizing something as depended on by general public as the Postal Service is widely debated on, but I personally stand against privatization. The absolute neutrality that people depend on would be gone, as everything would be driven by profit, especially in more rural areas where it costs more to deliver mail and such than the populated city areas. The amount of jobs lost would be astronomical, as there's over 30,000 locations across the United States alone. I also have no doubt they would reduce the number of services they perform, specifically the ones that don't see a profit, regardless of how many people across the country depend on them. I say again, a public service shouldn't be driven by profit. The Postal Service becoming a vehicle for profit would also mean everything about its service would end up costing more, as the beast of late-stage capitalism demands. The Postal Service is for everyone here. It doesn't even use money from taxpayers, with the exception of a small boost during the pandemic lockdown back in 2020. It relies on the money people put into it, sending out their mail, buying stamps, and using their other services. Consistent arguments I've heard and read is that much of the services are indeed not needed nor appreciated, an obvious one being distributing junk mail and advertisements. There's also general critique that the employees across the country are not very efficient at their jobs, as is typically lampooned. To that, I will say I'm not opposed to the idea of reforming parts of the Postal Service in order to make it more efficient in general, although this is coming from someone who doesn't have the first clue in how they work. And neither do the people making this claim either, probably. Something else I see people bring up a lot is that they lose too much money. Nah, they lost $65 billion in a span of 10 years, therefore it needs to be shut down and privatized. Alright pal, why don't we deal with the slightly bigger fish first? How about the Department of Defense's $3.5 trillion in unaccounted spending? Huh? That's a slightly bigger penny we should be concerned with, don't you think? With that said, Suda likely also thinks that privatization is a bad idea, as it also serves as a critique towards capitalism. I can only presume this is where his head was while writing up this scenario. How much freedom can a privatized soldier have, especially one with such access as everyone's names and everyone's addresses? Kind of like how in Killer 7 he conjured up the most evil and corrupt government he can think of, perhaps he was thinking of the most evil and corrupt postal service workers having such easy access to everyone's information. Maybe he thought, hey, with everyone's name and addresses right here in my hands, I can work as the perfect assassin. With that, I kind of see where his head was, and to his credit, he does say as much in this interview I mentioned.
The newly created 25th Ward brought forth a new kind of elitism. I wanted to portray the 25th Ward as a place where select people were chosen and made into a special elite group as a kind of social experiment. And I felt that the postal office would be perfect for this. I mean, the post office has everyone's personal information, you know? They know where you live, and they wouldn't seem out of place wherever you may see them, allowing them to hide out in plain view. A special aura that the profession gives off that made me go in that direction.
So I understand better. Post workers are also given the sense of dedication to their job as well. Think of that old motto, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stay these couriers from the swift completion of your death! I mentioned the Ministry of International Trade and Industry a few times, the ministry that Kosaka works for. I believe it's supposed to represent Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, which has a large stake in Japan Post as well as Japan's Postal Service. This ministry handles local government, elections, posts, of course, and telecommunication. All I can really take from this is that it infers Kosaka has heavy connections with whomever is ordering these postal assassins. I was trying to think about what the postmen were doing in the beginning of the chapter, whether it has something to do with the crime scene we're investigating or not, but then I realized it doesn't really matter. What we were being shown was how they work, their discretion at play as they're able to manipulate the outcomes of these murders so well. I believe that was a significance to the introduction of this chapter. There's Nakane near the end as well. Spoilers, you literally never speak with him again. But seeing him in this bright red blazer made me realize how little color the 25th Ward has. Some might even be mistaken thinking the game is just in black and white, meant to depict a noir crime drama. That's just how little color there is in this ward, but there are colors throughout. Another notable one is Shiryabu's blue tie, typically symbolizing trust and professionalism. Certainly the traits that someone in his position should possess. Wearing such a tie as your primary, well, only color, feels like he just read that somewhere and decided it would give others that impression. He seems like that kind of guy. Although, for what it's worth, he still did what he was told and helped out his superior. Another piece of color-coded symbolism, the victim's body was wearing what looks like a purple nightgown, a type of clothing one would wear when they intend to rest or sleep, while the color purple can mean luxury and royalty. This makes me think about what the 25th Ward likely promised to these individuals, to its citizens. A relaxed way of life in these luxurious apartments. Like the bellboy said, this place is supposed to be better than reality. But as we unfold more of this story, that couldn't be further from the truth. This woman died learning that what she was promised was a complete lie. This purple nightgown on her cold body. So all I can think it's telling us is that the dream is dead. Anyway, back to Nakane. Sporting this large red blazer that draws all of our attention. It typically means strength and confidence. With that and his speech about how he wants to reign over the 25th Ward really tells us he's a man of power, and how else does one like him get into a position of power other than a large sum of money? While we never learn exactly what he does, it can be assumed he comes from extreme wealth. Makes sense considering he's talking about destroying jobs and limiting resources to the lower class, having absolutely no sense of what they need in order to simply live their lives. So blatantly parallel deal with the real world today. Nakane isn't here to make the lives of the citizens better. He isn't here to enrich them in any way. He just wants to rule over the people in this desolate city. And as we move on, we'll see how this rots and distorts the ward as we continue the story. So, closing the chapter with the song title, Travel is Dangerous, also by Mogwai. The song is widely believed to be an homage to the Kursk submarine disaster that occurred in August of 2000, where a poorly manufactured torpedo exploded inside this large submarine, killing nearly all the sailors inside, leaving the remaining 23 to die as efforts to rescue them were folly, drowned by our own country, which could be a reference to the government's incompetence in responding to the disaster and being able to reach remaining survivors until 4 days after it happened. Drowned by our country. That could be relevant for later. Said government also refused help from foreign navies that were offering, as they wanted to handle this themselves, which they fucked up. There's sleuths of incompetence all over the situation, from the response time to how faulty the rescue attempt itself was. Like I said, in the end, there were no survivors. It's interesting to me that this is the song referenced, as I've described in past analyses that Suda has been known to criticize government work and bodies through the art he creates with his team. Old machine, cursed and forgotten, never surface again. Perhaps this could be a reflection on the 24th and 25th wards, the way they're transferring these unwanted citizens away to this new ward, cursed, old, and rotten, waved away, perhaps sunken to never surface again. What could this be implying here? You'll see eventually. The scene starts with a man alone at a cafe. He feels lost, lonely, and without purpose or even self-identity. A chunk of meat that lost its shape. He's at the end of his rope. As he utters his own name, perhaps telling an imaginary audience, Yasushi Kamijo has told us his next journey. With a mysterious pill in his drink, Kamijo takes a swig and... a bloody corpse, leaving only a key in his hand. This is Good-Looking Guy. October 11th, our HCU is already on the case, investigating Kamijo's apartment. They have a note describing the key he left is to a shelter in his garden. Kuroyanagi berates Jabroni, demanding they bring the key to the crime scene so they can continue investigating. Haruka, the coroner, calls to give us an update. Why are they talking like this? So while Haruka gets that ready, we pass the time with these two. They look down at the shelter door. Kuroyanagi says it could be some sort of paradise for Kamijo. But what exactly is down there? From how Kuro is reading Uehara's body language, she notes he seems discomforted by the word shelter. The delivery girl, Takahashi, comes by with the key they requested.
What? Who the fuck do you think you are?
Damn it. I really don't like the loud ones.
I don't need the annoying ass explanation. Just give it to me. I'm in a hurry here.
The two girls get along great. So as they're handed the key, we as the player realize this is different from the one Kamijo was holding in his hand. As they bicker about her delivery fee, fuck off, Jabroni. This time I'm a mute. By choice. They open the shelter below and are stunned by the sight, which we do not get to see. Later that day, we're at the headquarters of the HCU. Looking good, Uehara. No fancy intros this time. Again, probably a byproduct of being a little mobile phone game. Here we've got Jabroni, Kuroyanagi, the fat one that looks like me is Akama, and down there is Aoyama. They're talking about Kamijo, who sounded like a regular upright citizen and a good worker with a positive reputation. From how Aoyama describes his perversions, that implies the nature of the contents inside that shelter. Hatoba is HCU's chief leading the team, basically the same position as Kotobuki in the last game. According to him, they found the lead to some sort of intense crime Kamijo is responsible for, but we don't get specifics. I find this line interesting too. Just because he's dead doesn't mean that his power has disappeared. In fact, his consciousness has only become stronger. As the briefing concludes, Hatoba describes Kamijo as a textbook fascist. Kurenagi believes he was working for a higher up, possibly the Postal Federation. Jabroni mentions how the Federation has become more involved ever since the apartment complex incident we were a part of, but needs to investigate to find connections. Also, Uehara is an official member of the HCU, replacing Sakaki's position. RIP, girl. Fucking Unity engine. Hatoba gets some weird vibes from us, and we're off to see Haruka at the autopsy room. He says he found a mess of keys inside the body, but not their sources. He also just lets us know how much of a freak he is, being a collector of snuff films. It sounds like he's at least slightly addicted to the seedier side of the internet, a brief obsession among people when internet access was becoming more mainstream and readily available across households. I even remember exploring bits of the more infamous sites as a kid, like Style Project and Rotten.com. Of course, that's surface level stuff compared to what Haruka is talking about. This likely came from Suda's interest in what some would call the darknet, or dark web, which allegedly contains the kinds of media he's referring to here, and much more for that matter. So we're seeing here a small peek in that sense of darkness simply sitting inside someone that, on the outside, is a professional worker and part of society. Anyway, Haruka goes on telling you only one key goes with a recognizable locker within the ward. Central Station, so we've got a location. Later that day, we're looking at the coin locker this one key is for. Jabroni and Kurenagi are running late.
A coin locker, huh? As long as there isn't, like, a baby inside or something.
That's a reference to...
Like a dragon!
Apparently, this was an issue going on for a while in Japan, where new mothers would abandon their babies by putting them in a coin locker, leaving them without a trace before someone finds them. Anyway, Shiryabu is clearly anxious about the contents, rethinking his entire life. However, all we get is another key and a picture of a woman. Not much of a lead, but we've got something. Kurenagi is in, and this jabroni makes the absolute mistake of trying to reprimand her. Oh, you know you fucked up when the text box gets this big. Yeah, nice going, idiot. We use the magical power of modern cell phones to transmit the image data. Yeah, look at that Windows 95 ass shit. Fucking love it. We also learned that Kamijo liked tabletop games. Perhaps this is why we're being led through such a trail with little clues. One last game he made for the HCU. From how Kurenagi is describing Kamijo, it sounds like his degeneracy comes from a creative mind. That those who want to create things are all kinds of fucked in the head. While that's certainly not a stretch to say regarding a lot of famous creators, I wonder how much Suda is reflecting on himself and what he's put out for the world thus far back in the mid-2000s. But either way, that desire to keep creating, even past death, I'm sure that's something he'll strive for. Kuro emphasizes that we're now a part of Kamijo's world. Just like the immersive power of a fine piece of media, the real world is gone now. Perhaps that is Kamijo's intent with these characters. Kuro even says she knows where the next key goes. Later that day, we're in this large department building. Inside, we go to a high floor that contains a manga store and cafe. Master? Kurenagi greets Fukamachi. Apparently, she's been around these parts before. This gem takes a liking to jabroni, which makes him really uncomfortable. Fukamachi runs this place, and he's very proud of his more alternative lifestyle. Someone like Fukamachi, how he looks and acts made me consider his character. He's very minor, only being in this chapter, but I wondered why Suda wrote him like this. It's easy to interpret him as gay, right? But he also seems to live an alt lifestyle. I spoke to a gay friend who was in his late teens during the 90s and came out of the closet around that time. He told me he had a hard time fitting in, originally being part of the punk scene. But during that time, it was people of goth and alt culture that befriended him, not taking issues with his orientation. The goth culture I'm talking about can be traced to have started around the late 70s, Joy Division being one of the early pioneers, a band Suda obviously has a deep admiration for. The culture really bloomed in the 80s thanks to post-punk band The Cure, another band Suda also clearly admires. As these and other cultures were thriving throughout the 80s, they would draw closer to the mainstream and help what would form the 90s alt culture, where more people felt encouraged to be themselves and not afraid of expressing what they like, even if it's considered weird. In a lot of ways, it was also anti-capitalist and anti-consumerist, as many would sooner get their wardrobes at a thrift store before even thinking about stepping foot in a mall, you know? That's not to say corporations in the mainstream didn't influence the culture here and there. It's undeniable that MTV was a big influence to this culture throughout, sometimes even amplifying it. Goth culture, however, was typically disregarded and shunned in the 90s, many outlets trying to label the whole thing as dangerous and satanic. You know, kind of like video games. It doesn't take a genius to see why nerds and goths tend to get along, many just being nerds that are also goth. Although, I'm not saying Fukamachi is exactly goth, but he's clearly part of an alt crowd, which mixes in with a lot of that. While some might find this depiction of a gay man to be slightly tasteless, I find it interesting to think that Suda was trying to give shout out to that culture that helped form his taste as a young adult. I'm not sure how much of this kind of subculture reached Japan back then, but Suda always seemed interested in learning about how that culture was thriving in the United States as well as Europe. But back to the case at hand, it sounds like Fukamachi also runs some kind of online sex chat cafe, and Kuro is in on it too. Says with the help of Hiruka, they built an AI of sorts to talk to clients, which has been a hit. How about that? Fukamachi sees the key and says it's to an exclusive chat room for a man that went by GLG, or good looking guy. As they go into this private room, we're greeted by a humble computer setup. Kuro's already seasoned in this environment, so what's the password? What else but... The chat opens showing an empty room. Well, not completely empty, as there's a key on the table. They send this image over to start researching the location. Then there's this little exchange, and I'm pretty convinced it's a joke how there's no spoken lines in the game, and they only communicate through these text boxes. Another fine example of the weird meta jokes Suda likes putting into his work. Anyway, Takahashi is apparently a wizard at figuring out locations from images alone, as long as it's local. The two talk about Kamijo a bit, seeing this tiny private room. They infer he might have found importance in isolation and absolute privacy, no longer wishing to be part of any sort of watch or society. Kuro thinks this is how a lot of people turn out as they get older. Not everyone conforms to the city or society they're a part of, right? This could also be a comment towards how people started treating the booming internet during this time and how much that encouraged folks to practically live inside their own computer. The current day equivalent is the flat-ass rectangles we all stare at for hours on end. Anyway, Takahashi has already made her way into the room. Turns out it's much closer than they thought. The wall in front of the computer is no wall, but a blinded window. It's smoked glass, which means only the girl in the room could have seen Kamijo on the desk when using it. Kuro figures he liked being watched, but on his own terms. Fukumachi says Kamijo gave him 50 million yen, keeping this room reserved to him and only him. In this room, they find another key, along with another picture of a woman. Takashi thinks this key needs a special appraiser, and gives us 4 colored keys. Video game shit. Mystery equals keys. Starting to think this is some joke about certain types of games. With that, we're off to a convenience store? Oh yeah, this is a classic trope. You go to a place that looks totally normal on the surface, but give that person there the password and you're granted access to what's hidden inside.
Please cover your ears while I say the secret access word. Cheese.
Good morning, Agent Johnson.
But not before you're given these instructions. Yeah. Alright, no problem. Did you guys remember that too? So right as we enter... Oh, fuck, what were those directions again? We'll figure it out. Once we find the first lock, Shiryabu figures we need to use the keys, but we don't know the combination. Time to call our hotline support, Takahashi. Alright everyone, let's hear her out. Blue, yeah. Yellow saffron. Okay, red, green? Okay. Alright, I got it. Alright, guys, it's easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, bada bing, and... Fuck. Okay, it's fine. I probably messed up the order. Here we are. Alright, and... God damn it! So, reading it a third time, I realize she's throwing us off with how she describes the order of keys. Alright, I'm not stupid, guys, I swear. Hell yeah, nothing to it. We're in this tiny-ass bathroom with Shiryabu. The appraiser speaks to us behind a ticket window. He takes the keys from us, and we just wait here. Listen to Jabroni, bitch, bitch, bitch. Until finally. The next day, we find another apartment. Kuro and Jabroni aren't too optimistic. Either way, this trail leads us to finding another key and photo combo. This one looks more like a car key, as Kuro notes. Whoa, race queen Kuroyanagi. Oh, to the parking lot. Shiryabu notes that despite the apartment complex being pretty basic, the lot is full of expensive luxury cars. Kuro says that exposes this complex for what it is, a base for rich people to stick their mistresses in, a deviant's home away from home. She says this came from the bubble bursting in the country, leaving large buildings like this vacant and ripe to take advantage of. Which is funny she brings this up, as this is an actual crisis Japan is dealing with right now in 2025. There's an abundance of empty homes and nobody buying them. Of course, according to researchers, this isn't due to any sort of bubble bursting, but rather the country's aging population, dwindling birth rate, and certain property tax incentives. So, the 25th Ward seems to have developed this little community of cheaters and their paramours. Kuroyanagi is realistic about the matter, saying this is bound to happen in just about any community. I like her line here too, that trying to make everything clean and just is a waste of time. With that said, it's not surprising that someone like Kamijo dabbled with this kind of behavior. Kuro finds the car key this goes to, and it's pretty high-end, bearing its own advanced navigation technology. It's already got a saved destination, so they start driving. Hate it when mom and dad fight in the car. According to Kuro, this car is heading towards an unlocked room. Feels appropriate with all this key business. We arrive at the destination, a single house right off the shore. Jabroni notes this location is where the government plans to construct a 26th ward, telling us the HCU has access to such sensitive and early information. We're talking 20 years early. Kuro notes that with those plans, this part of the world has no sense of time. As we enter this house, a young girl greets us. Kuro already knows her name is Machiko. Jabroni is as confused as us, but Kuro describes Machiko as a contract lodger. Lodger is another word for renter or occupier, but contract? This sounds like she was assigned to stay here for Kamijo. She also describes her name as a code. The name itself can mean a number of different things, but one that's most consistent is child. Which, I guess we're starting to find some implications here. Think about how upright an organization can be if they dabble with child trafficking, you know? Machiko is already aware that Kamijo is dead, however. She says that connection finally severed as Kuro arrived, stating Kamijo knew she and Jabroni would show up. Machiko explains that Kamijo was the first diver, which is a league of overseers for the Postal Service. He was once a killer like the rest of them, but has since retired. Huh. Complaints? Snubbed out.
Had to take care of some customers that filed complaints. My apologies. So much to do with so little help. Yeah, I can't stand these people with all their nonsense complaints. They think they can just say anything. It's crazy.
Holy shit, was Destroy Man a... Huh. Machiko goes on to talk more about this private syndicate that Kamijo came from and how they allocate money through their assassination gigs. As a diver, he secluded himself from the rest of the world. Through his massive wealth, he bought Machiko. Oh. Okay, that's better, I guess. Either way, it seems he had a deep connection with this girl. Kamijo was considered a loose end to the crimes the Postal Federation had committed. Anything leaking out before they were in a higher position of power could be detrimental to them. Kamijo last said to Machiko that he was to meet the building administrator. I believe he's specifically referring to Kosuke Kurumizawa. Puzzling right now since all we did was find his corpse in chapter 1. Kuro asks Machiko where she's from, and her answer? The shelter. This is where we learn both of them were once shelter kids. Back by the complexes, Jabroni and Kuro talk about Kamijo a bit. Finding motivation behind his suicide, they deduce he was trying to unveil all the crimes he committed for the Postal Federation, the photos being some of his victims. It seems the Postal Service intends to kill anyone that disagrees with their actions, even for the smallest things. Kuro believes Kamijo took his own life in order for Machiko to be left alone. I guess she thinks the Postal Federation would go after the one he loved if he didn't comply. We see someone arrive at the shore house once again. Party in the dark. The title of this chapter is Good Looking Guy, so it isn't surprising that most of it is about Kamijo, a retired Postal Service assassin who ended up knowing too much, and would never truly find peace until he made himself disappear. While we never actually see what was inside that secret room of his, the implications say the contents were sinister. Perhaps the bodies of his victims? That would explain how they knew about the women in the photos. Either way, I think this is an analog for the growing history of infamous serial killers, how a lot of them at the surface seem like upright citizens according to witnesses. Some would even say they were considerably attractive. There's endless examples, like Rodney Alcala or Ted Bundy. Well, Kamijo was already a professional assassin, so I guess this is a little different. Still, imagine seeing his apartment and nothing else. On the surface, he just looks like a single guy that likes gardening. For what it's worth, I think it's a funny juxtaposition, as Hiruka is sort of a compliment to this, being nothing more but a professional worker while he's very open about his developed deviancy, addicted to collecting snuff films and the like. Adds to the idea that sometimes the one that's more open to that kind of thing is considerably more trustworthy. Maybe Travis was right.
It's the ones who don't look like bad guys who are the real bad guys.
Regarding that last bit at Kamijo's beach house, I first saw this as Machiko passing on, perhaps ending it herself, in order to be with her love, Kamijo, once again. However, we learn in the Matchmaker and Placebo chapters that Kamijo faked his death in order for everyone to drop the pursuit and spend the rest of his life with Machiko, his own friend standing in as him to sell the fake death. Ignore how forensics would debunk that. Either way, that last scene was Kamijo reuniting with Machiko, off to spend the rest of their lives together, away from this mutated society that intended to destroy them. With Kamijo finding himself displeased with his current place in life, the evolved technology of slick cars, navigation systems, and modernized housing, this feels like further critiques on how people are losing their way of life while submitting to ever-evolving technology that is further developed for the intent of max profits, a path to late-stage capitalism. People are losing their souls, their means to love, and what it means to be a person. The likes of Kuroyanagi and Shiryabu barely cling onto their humanity as they try to utilize such tools to investigate the actions of an individual. All the meanwhile, the world continues to feel so empty and lifeless. The chapter ends with the song title Party in the Dark by Mogwai. While sounding a little less lugubrious than the previous tracks, some of the lyrics are striking. I see everything, all that suffering, tiny vehicles, space-age miracles. Perhaps this can be seen from Kamijo's perspective, seeing the state of the human condition in such an advanced-seeming world. These technological revolutions are not doing anything to help the people dwelling in such a society. All our hearts are sore, no fight left in this war. Makes me think of Kamijo's efforts within the Postal Federation and all he put into it. Perhaps reflecting on how everything he did for such a federation was for naught and how he doesn't see any fulfillment in his actions. Eyes, taken from us by those we thought kind, hungry for another peace of mind, silent and impatient without time, directionless and innocent. This could be him reflecting on those of higher power, taking advantage of him. While clearly kind enough to convince him to join something like the Federation, they only took advantage of him and intended to dispose of him once he was considered even a slight liability. Hungry for peace of mind, hungry for his death. In a way, this song helps justify why Kamijo did what he did, getting one up on the Federation, leaving them none the wiser while succeeding in snatching some sort of peace with Machiko. So, I figure it's best to give a content warning, specifically for this chapter. I can see this being the one a lot of people have been anticipating, or even dreading. Understandably so, it was a huge point of controversy among Grasshopper fans and people that played the 25th Ward. And by that, I mean 9 different people had opinions on it. I think it can be argued that Boys Don't Cry is the darkest these adventures get, and much of that has to do with Shiryabu committing sexual assault. And despite how quickly that moment passes, it was still considerably shocking, perhaps even more so due to how it's presented. I discussed this part extensively, as I think it's important. I know this can be a raw subject for some folks, so I'll give a timestamp once it's coming up. You can skip the entire discussion if you choose to do so. With that said, let's get back to the story. It's November 2nd. Shiryabu is trying to get money from this ATM, down on himself for his own frivolous spending. Some of his little manifesto here is concerning. I'm also noting that he states that he's not a bad person. I once heard a phrase that rings true pretty often. If someone is answering a question nobody asked, that answer is a lie. Either way, he is strapped for cash, but thinks he can get to the next payday without starving to death. Well, you better start enjoying ice soup, buddy, because this ATM is not accepting his card. This sets him off real quick.
Travis, hello?
He uses the service phone to rant at a random maintenance person. Yeah, some ATMs had an entire telephone you used just to call maintenance, which was the style at the time. Anyway, all Jabroni uses it for is to hurl threats at a random individual, and they reply they'll be right there. However, a hitman shows up. Gun in hand, guess he's ready to take care of the problem, to Jabroni's surprise. A lot of rambling going on here, but then they break into the world of RPGs. That's right, we're taking on this pool turn-based style. Your choices are limited, but there's a correct way to approach these. It can be tough since there isn't much feedback, so you just have to figure it out through trial and error. Once this assassin is defeated, a blood-covered jabroni reflects on there being a total of 7 assassins he needs to conquer. A league of assassins, huh? And this dork-ass loser is bound to fight them on his own? And they're here to confront a sole individual? Perhaps a sort of ranking system? This is Boys Don't Cry. We cut to Kosaka having another secret meeting with Hatoba. He's talking about Shiryabu going missing, and Kosaka finds it strange that he felt the need to tell him this. Interesting, since he mentions the Regional Adjustment Bureau immediately after. Kosaka says he has no idea, but we have reason enough at this point to suspect that he's lying to Hatoba, who thinks they're after Shiryabu. Speaking of, that actually kind of makes sense. The first chapter talked about how the postal workers have been assassinating citizens for being unreasonable, even in the smallest ways. So Shiryabu yelling and threatening a service worker most likely reaches their threshold. Or, at the very least, give them an excuse if he is a legitimate target. Anyway, in between each RPG fight are these segments that, as far as I can tell, all occur before Jabroni's turn-based adventure, and each instance shows a little more of why Jabroni is getting caught up in all of this, as well as this slow descent into absolute madness. A few days before his ATM escapade, Shiryabu is investigating a corpse shoved in a bucket with Kuroyanagi, and she's pretty checked out from the matter, frustrating him. I think she's trying to make him do the legwork himself so he can properly investigate on his own. He notes how this is a postal worker's MO, that they've been known to use a similar method to leave out a corpse, recalling a time they threw a bucketed corpse off a building, smashing into the concrete near random civilians. He also mentions that Kuromizawa, the building's manager, was found with similar looking wounds as these corpses. The two note that Kuromizawa could still be alive somehow, but don't specify while still theorizing he's behind these kinds of acts. Kuro berates our favorite jabroni some more, essentially stating he isn't taking investigations seriously enough that he doesn't understand just how dire these kinds of cases are. The reason there's an HCU to begin with is because they have to handle cases that are too much for regular cops and detectives. They aren't called heinous crimes for nothing, right? Shiryabu declares he'll go after Kuromizawa and tries really hard to think. Poor little baby jabroni. Back in the present, we're at another ATM. Hey, this one looks a little familiar. Just like before, he can't use the card. Shiryabu is stunned. Another hitman is here to fight. I have to say, Shiryabu visiting ATMs and then triggering these assassin fights is eerily similar to Travis initiating the next ranked stage with ATM visits in No More Heroes. Just a good example of where Suda's mind was while writing this chapter. Either the concept of our favorite otaku assassin was forming inside his head, or it was already in pre-production. Hard to say, just takes a couple moves to get this guy down and... Red-headed stepchild. Apparently this was a popular term back in the day for someone that's neglected or treated unfairly. With that, the hitman is defeated, although his parting words are very interesting. Keep this in mind. I'm going to go over my thoughts on the ATMs at the end of discussing this chapter. Flung in reverse again, Shiryabu is on the hunt for some postal workers. He's at a construction site, greeted by a guard. He tries to pry into what he's guarding, learning that it might be the sewers. He notes how all of his jobs lately have been barren, that nobody ever even comes by while guarding whatever he's assigned to. But he suddenly gets really defensive and rants at Jabroni like he's Wendy Oldbag. But then he does what all Ace Attorney fans probably wanted to do during the Silver Samurai case. Alright. With that, he picks out some postal workers in their green visors, quickly taking two out like a movie marksman. The whole scenario feels like a typical action shootout scene, actually. He wounds the third delivery guy, and as they spiel, he already knows Shiryabu's name. This likely means he was on their radar to kill, perhaps due to the incident at the end of chapter 1. Not just these workers, but everyone, as the delivery guy says it doesn't end here, that they'll keep going after him. Stacking the movie tropes, he says the two aren't much different, and that there's no turning back. Does he mean the inevitability of his death, or something else entirely? He gives the guy one last message for Kuromizawa. Back in the present, another ATM, another card read error. What kind of name is Giblin? Whatever, his little knife doesn't impress Shiryabu anyway. Start the fight. Regarding this RPG stuff, I just want to point out that this is literally the first of this quote-unquote trilogy where there's a fail state involving the character's death. Something very common regarding general game design. However, the Silver Case didn't have one. Flower, Sun, and Rain didn't have one either. I just find that interesting, where this really does throw Shiryabu into the world of video games.
What does recommend say?
What is that?
I'm pretty sure it's French for
It's
continue.
Restart.
Or yeah, or restart.
Let's do it, but French this time.
Doesn't take more than a little offense and defense to get this fool down with the ultimate attack. Catch the tiger by this toe, you fuck. Sounds like Hatoba already sent out people to kill him. Dying a few times, huh? So it sounds like Hatoba is aware of the postal workers and is using their service to try and take out Jabroni. They discuss how Kurumizawa might still be alive and perhaps even Kamijo, as I mentioned before. Hatoba! How are you gonna fumble that? God, get me the fuck out of here. The next assassin is a woman, and Jabroni immediately gets down bad. Interesting that he says she must be an illusion. Oh, what a selection, huh?
A hitman has appeared. What?
A hitman has appeared. Get horny? I guess that's an option, guys. We're gonna do it.
A hitman has appeared.
Oh! You know the answer.
Get horny.
Horny.
All it does is take a single keystroke. That's right, call him Cuomo, because Shiryabu sexually assaults this assassin. That single instance was enough to make her give up. Unsurprisingly, this part of the scenario received a noticeable reaction from players. I mean, how could it not? Shiryabu assaults this assassin, the only female one, mind you, and by the decision of the player. You want to make progress? Well, you better get horny!
Hello, the hitman rants and raves. The hitman shouts abuse at Jabroni. Yeah, I didn't realize that was an option. Jabroni's heart is full and calm. Jabroni, you're a sick fuck.
Jabroni's heart is full and calm. What? What just happened?
Jabroni attacks. Jabroni gets horny. Jabroni jumps on the hitman. The hitman's body goes limp. Ooh. And he has learned a new technique. Basically, the enemy to death, I guess.
And I'm not sure how important this is, but the original Japanese version translates something closer to heat up. But if the selected option leads to the same thing, then it isn't really any different. Just in case people thought it was some weird form of interpreter meddling.
Jabroni gets horny. Jabroni jumps on the hitman.
Holy shit!
Now, Suda, what the fuck?
What the fuck?
The hitman's body goes limp.
Oh, are you
the hitman gives up fighting back.
My...
Whoa!
Holy shit! Kind of what you Jabroni! Jabroni via... You're just the bitch!
Jabroni is satisfied.
Me too.
Jabroni accidentally made it out of the battlefield.
Accidentally. Jabroni just got to sign on with the Lakers.
Jesus Christ!
Holy fuck!
Suda. Buddy. We gotta talk.
We need to talk a little bit. There are some moral issues we have.
We need to talk about Suda.
A lot of folks that played the game said this went too far, it's problematic, some even stated they completely dropped the game after reaching this part. I understand that initial feeling, it's assuredly fucked up, but I think that's the point. And not in a purely for shock value sense either, there's more to it in my opinion. I'll talk about why in a few moments. First, I think I should bring up this review I read a while back. And while it may seem like I'm just picking a fight with an ancient review, I think it's important to tackle because I've seen this cited before when the game was discussed, both in a positive and negative light. And for God's sakes, I don't want anyone thinking this is an attack on the reviewer either. I'm sure they're a fine individual, and they're obviously entitled to their own opinion. With that said, let's look at what they wrote. There's a handful of issues I take with the review, like this and this, but I'll just focus on how they discuss the events of this current chapter. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you can see the text on the screen. The reviewer claims that the game finds the act of sexual assault to be comedic and celebratory, and that Shiryabu isn't punished for this, but looked at as a positive or heroic character, which is like, just insane to me. Firstly, their posit that this was comedic and celebratory undoubtedly comes from how it's presented with its RPG style and format. Level up those stats! Yes, this situation appears and sounds lighthearted. That's the whole point of the juxtaposition. It's supposed to shock you because not only is this character you've been following doing something so vile and disgusting, it's being presented in such a video gamey manner where you're technically the one making the decision. Oopsies, your little protagonist just committed sexual assault on this random woman. Probably ruined her whole fucking life. Haha, wee! Let me put it this way. To make a point regarding the disconnect between video games and reality, how else are they supposed to present it? I think this scene is a critique on numbskulls who think video games can't say anything relevant or nuanced, that it's all supposed to be just for fun.
The game is fun. The game is a battle. If it's not fun, why bother? If it's not a battle, where's the fun? If it's not fun, why bother?
It's escapism, right? An escape from real-world politics and heavy issues. Yeah, here you go. Molest this girl out in the open. Haha, are we having fun yet?
What's the matter, kid? Don't you like video games? Why? Don't we make you laugh? Aren't we fucking funny?
The game suddenly changing into a turn-based battle with an RPG veneer is also an apt choice. After all, what does that stand for? Role-playing game. To add even more to the concept of playing the role of such a horrible individual, the game reminds you of a genre named after the act of being someone you're not, enveloping you even further into this insipid idea that games don't need to actually say anything, they just need to be brainless toys. The chapter also depicts Suda's state of mind and what he wanted to express in his games during this time. These assassins actually remind me of The Killer 7 a decent amount, and lest we forget how that game handled its sexual themes throughout. We bore witness to Samantha molest a catatonic Harmon, and later be reduced to a violated corpse. There's also No More Heroes with its themes of sex, death, and violence in media. Honestly, I sort of find this individual being up in arms over this scene in the 25th Ward hypocritical, considering the things presented in Killer 7, especially because they even claim to love that game in the review. I don't know, I guess they just don't remember those parts? My point is, to misunderstand the satire on display, its driving point, and coming to the conclusion that the 25th Ward is celebrating the act of sexual assault is some of the purest ignorance I've witnessed regarding the feedback of this scenario, and frankly this whole game. Secondly, I have no clue where they got the idea that Jabroni is being seen as some sort of heroic martyr. Their words. He's transforming into a monster, and that's very obvious. He's completely losing his humanity as the criminal power is consuming him. It's kind of a joke in itself. A lot of stories always start with that wimpy underachiever that gets pushed around at first, but goes through an arc where they triumph into greatness, seen as a hero. Many people thought that would be the case for Jabroni eventually, but instead, the complete opposite happens. He doesn't get any sort of redemption, he becomes even more of a piece of shit that loses his mind and questions his own psyche for the rest of the game. And if we're to go even further and tread on future titles, Travis Strikes Again shows he never regained his mind nor his humanity. He's a babbling psycho that gets suplexed by this faux-hawked nerd. Again, how is this supposed to be a positive portrayal of the character? He started out as a pathetic nobody and became a depraved lunatic where his own existence is extremely questionable. It's gamified as a commentary of how game likers are often railroaded into doing horrible things because that's just the objective of the game they're playing, something this scenario shares with the original No More Heroes. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more obvious it is that Suda was already piecing together No More Heroes as a story while writing the scenario out, visiting ATMs in order to trigger these confrontations with assassins. Speaking more on the point, this chapter alone showed Shiryabu killing multiple people before this ATM fight, and I'm sure nobody batted an eye, but when he assaults this woman, this is the moment people stop and go, oh shit, and begin questioning things. Is one activity really worse than the other? I don't know. I can't even fathom committing something so heinous as either of these things. They're both deplorable. I'm not here to give a definitive answer to that, as I don't think there is one. It's a perfect rhetoric on the nature of violent video games and what we're expected to do in them.
A hitman or a hitwoman has appeared.
Get horny.
Get horny.
Alright, you're the boss.
Jabroni gets real horny. Like so horny. He jumps on the hitman.
Oh no!
Oh no.
The hitman's body goes limp. The hitman gives up fighting back. The hitman cries.
Oh no!
The hitman rants and raves.
Oh my god.
The hitman shouts abuses at Jabroni. The hitman shuts up.
What happened? Oh my god.
Jabroni basically kind of wins. Jabroni's heart is full and calm.
No.
What the fuck?
Well, you guys said it. I'm not the one who made that decision.
There's no way if the option get horny comes up that I'm not gonna pick it.
There was no other choice. What were we going to do?
Suda knows what he's doing.
Oh my god.
You okay?
Oh, now that just doesn't sit right with me. I'm sorry.
Boo-hoo! I had to play a pedophile in the last game, and now I'm playing.
You have to sit here and think about what you just did. Yes, it feels wrong, but why? Suda, to this day, still says he always wants to leave lasting impressions on anyone that plays something he directed, to have the experience buzz in your head for various reasons.
When I put out a game, I don't want people to just play it and go, oh, that was cool, and then just have it be over, you know? I want the people who play my game, who play our games, to feel that it sort of left something over for them in their everyday lives afterwards. I want them to remember it once in a while and feel something they felt from the game. I want it to stick with them in one way or another. That's the main thing I'm trying to do with the games that I make.
To top things off here, the reviewer states that seeing this act be shown as this grand display of comedy made him sick to his stomach. And I'm just internally screaming, you are so close to getting it. So close. But this is as far as the thought goes, as they ultimately dismissed the 25th Ward as a happy adventure game. So forget that, I guess. To the critic, who frankly stopped reviewing games a long time ago, if you are somehow watching this, no hard feelings. You're entitled to your opinion, and I concur that the game can be hard for a lot of people to swallow. I just think it deserves to be given a bit of credence, and I argue that these instances aren't just pure shallow scenes meant to only shock the player, like you claim at the end of the review. I don't find it exaggerative to claim Suda puts much more nuance and depth into the original projects he writes and directs. I also hope this doesn't feel like I'm singling the reviewer out. It's just really hard to find a published review from an accredited journalist-based website to begin with. IGN didn't review it, Kotaku didn't review it, Polygon didn't review it. I find it somewhat bizarre how heavily this game was ignored. This isn't just some tiny indie piece. I would call it a AA production at least, and Nisa is the publisher. They're pretty prominent. So what exactly happened? Oh, at least GameSpot reviewed it. A glowing 6 out of 10, which isn't surprising. Not throwing shade at them, it's just pretty par for the course regarding Grasshopper games. And the review has fair points, like how the puzzles aren't very good. I like to look up reviews from more prominent journalists when I'm analyzing games, just to see what the quote-unquote zeitgeist was expressing. But it's slim pickings regarding the 25th Ward.
It's a visual novel combined with the typical quirkiness Suda51 has become known for. Music is decent, but the voiceover is non-existent. Instead, you get some robotic bleeps that get annoying really fast. If only they invested a bit more money in getting proper voiceover recordings, it would be a major improvement. It's the absurdity of Suda51's work that got us interested in playing this game in the first place. He worked together with Masahi Oka and Sako Kato on the script. After playing the 25th Ward, The Silver Case, we can't help but feel like something is missing. Even though the story is pretty good, the game just lacks conviction. If only the graphics and audio were given a little bit more love.
What is this fucking garbage? I'm not going to deny that there are probably people who only took this scenario at face value. You know the kind. The ones that go, whoa, based, whenever anyone publicly says or commits something absolutely deplorable because they're a stupid-ass teenager in the body of an adult that retained this immature edgelord mentality that nestled in their head after Gamergate. Come on guys, I got out of that mindset myself. It's not hard. Even so, I'm not going to deny that this scene made people uncomfortable. Maybe even make them regret the experience. But I am saying that this scenario at least has something to say, which I think counts for a lot. We can debate about the handling and delicacy of this scene and its subject matter until the adjusters come home, but I don't think the juxtaposition can be denied. It makes for the easiest way to hide something in front of someone's face, which Suda is pretty good at doing. Getting back to the story, another flashback of Shiryabu visiting a row of vending machines. A strange man by the name of Ishizuka pops out from the trash cans. The two seem to know each other and are firstly chatting about some of the products in the machines, but the mood changes a bit when Shiryabu asks for something special. Basically, the two are speaking in code, as Ishizuka seems to be some type of spy, able to get information nobody else can. For what it's worth, he's also based on a designer that was part of Grasshopper Manufacture during this time. As he gives Shiryabu vital information, I like to think it's a joke of how he's a developer from the outside, so he knows all the ins and outs of this world, being one of the numerous creators. Anyway, Ishizuka brings up the Okiai Syndicate, an old Yakuza family that disbanded when the 25th Ward was established. It's implied in this conversation that ex-Yakuza members became part of the Postal Federation. Shiryabu asks if he can look into Kuromizawa. He complies and says to look out for something called Mont Blanc, which means nothing if you haven't played Matchmaker, but to me, it further cements a connection between these assassins and the Regional Adjustment Bureau. Anyway, on to the next ATM in the present. As the card declines, Shiryabu comments how he feels he's getting stronger from these battles. This is a simple fight, as you're only given one option. As Shiryabu reflects how he showed no humanity, he feels he's grown as a cop and a person. We're treated to another flashback. Shiryabu is in a hospital called Evil Diver University? Huh? Shiryabu is visiting someone. It's Munakata from the Silver Case. It seems his condition has only gotten worse, bedridden with various tubes and devices connected as life support. The two seem to know each other as Munakata immediately tells him to leave, says he can't help him any further. Shiryabu is asking if he knows Kuromizawa, claiming he was also a diver like Kamijo and also connected to Kamui. Munakata tells him that Kamui is nothing more than worldly thoughts of humans. Like his spirit and influence has now just become part of human behavior within the wards, perhaps. Shiryabu isn't listening and says the spirit itself continues to thrive. The two argue over this matter, but Munakata is already tired of this, telling him to forget about death filing. For what it's worth, he is listed as a death filing special agent for TRO, one of the main factions from the Silver Case. But Shiryabu refuses to drop the skill, saying he learned the process in order to enlighten himself. Munakata doesn't argue further, giving him a lead and letting Shiryabu go towards his fate. ATM approached, card declined, assassin spawned. Yep, it's gamer time. As we're watching this, just wanted to note this whole scenario is also the second time Suda has mocked the concept of RPGs, and many of us should know it won't be the last. Makes me wonder if he's just having a bit of fun, or if he does have some sort of animosity towards the entire genre.
FF6 made me break my damn controller, so...
What? So you don't know FF7?
Nope. Even if they remake it, I'm not going anywhere near FF7.
As Jabroni realizes his stats are maxed out, he is deeply hurt inside. One last flashback, Shiryabu is in a mobile phone shop, but it's not just any shop. This has a maid theme going on. It even offers a service of talking to a maid over the phone. Now, this entire scenario kind of confused me. I know maids are popular in Japan, I know mobile phones got hugely popular in Japan. Pretty sure that country was ahead of the curve from everyone else, but both of these combined? I asked Steelball Runner since I'm pretty sure he's lived in Japan all of his life. Turns out there were mobile phone shops with a maid theme in parts of Japan. According to this article, you can have tea with a maid while shopping for a phone, which back then there was a huge selection of unique designs and such. Customers can even talk with the maids for advice on which phone to get. It's hard to say when this collaboration started, but it lasted at least a couple years. Shiryabu is embarrassed by the maid's interactions, but his ears perk as she mentions Kuromizawa. This explains why she was being so forward, as she was likely sent by him. It's hard to say what information she even gave him, but clearly some sort of seed was planted in this interaction. We're at the final ATM. Shiryabu doesn't even use his card. Instead, the assassin just comes by and says the card cannot be used. He tells Shiryabu he's going to be killed by someone he loves, which confuses him as he says the only one he loves is already dead. Possibly talking about his mother? Either way, fight time! Only one option, death filing. With that final boss defeated, Shiryabu's transformation is complete. After successfully death filing, Kuromizawa finally comes into contact. He heads to a batting center, meeting Kuromizawa, who's impressed by his transformation. Jabroni has seen everything in life and death now. Jabroni notes that, to him, he looks inhuman, not even alive. Perhaps his stoicism is just that striking. But Kuromizawa retorts that Shiryabu looks even less human, perhaps noting his sense of humanity is now gone. Next cut, we see Hatoba pointing his gun at Kosaka. He thinks Kosaka knows more than he's letting on now, trying to interrogate info out of him regarding Kuromizawa. Kosaka stays cool and implores he's not lying, even noting that it can be considered natural that an HCU cop and a Postal Federation diver could clash like this. However, Hatoba states there's no records of him at all, not even evidence of erasure of records. It's as if Kuromizawa was just plopped onto the world. He believes Kosaka is doing this in order to observe Shiryabu, but why would he do that? However, he has shown great interest in Uehara. The last scene has us in a very familiar batting cage area. Kurenagi has come to talk to an old face. It then cuts abruptly, telling you to wait for the next chapter. What a dirty little prank Suda pulled. Can you imagine being a fan of his 2 previous games? You pay 300 yen or whatever these tiny episodes cost on your shitty phone. You get so excited seeing good old Sumio for a solid few seconds, and it just goes, haha, just kidding, fucker. Better buy the next chapter in 3 months or whatever. 1% of monster. The chapter itself was called Boys Don't Cry. I guess Suda was trying to at least use the title for a song reference since he couldn't have anything for the ending like in The Silver Case back in 2006 or whatever. This is a song by The Cure, which sounds upbeat, but let's look at the lyrics to see if this relates to the chapter. I would say I'm sorry if I thought it would change your mind, but I know that this time I have said too much, been too unkind. This can be seen as a sense of regret, as the person has gone too far with their actions to get any sort of redemption. Perhaps we can see this as Jabroni getting too far into these strings of death, his fate being sealed once he initiated the first ATM battle. I try to laugh about it, cover it all up with lies. I try to laugh about it, hiding the tears in my eyes, 'cause boys don't cry. Boys don't cry. Perhaps Shiryabu feels he's gone down this path because of what is expected of him. They were trying to raise him to be this hard-boiled detective that was stoic and showed no mercy, but it turned him into this horrible monster that can't properly express himself. This boy doesn't cry. He no longer shows emotion, enveloping the idea that as a man, he is not supposed to cry. All the lyrics have this sense of regret and expectations one perhaps has trouble reaching. This could all even relate to Munakata, who sounds like he raised Shiryabu during his time in the Force. The master is no longer able to control his student. All he can do is watch this boy become a monster. This boy won't cry. So let's talk about the rather underhanded centerpiece of this chapter, which is the assortment of ATMs. All of them have particular kanji displayed on them, and I thank Steel Ball Runner for doing such extensive research on what these represent. Simply put, Shiryabu is losing his agency, his life essence, as he descends into hell. And these 7 ATMs represent 7 different depictions or figures from hell that are of certain folklore and pieces of fiction. So let's go over them. The first ATM reads as Kumo Ito Financial. Kumo Ito meaning spider's thread. To put it short, it's about a man who was stuck in hell, but due to a good deed was given a chance through a silvered spider thread to climb his way to paradise, or heaven. However, other dwellers are below him, also trying to climb the thread, and as he shouts the thread is only for him, it breaks and brings him all the way back to the pit of hell they were trying to escape. He was cursed to stay in hell as he was only concerned for his own salvation, rather than helping others. This could hint at Shiryabu's character and how he never puts others before himself, always concerned with his own comfortability or convenience, rather than genuinely being there for someone else. This is similar to when he was just getting started as a cop. Recall the whiteout prologue in The Silver Case. However, all we've seen him do in the 25th Ward is act like a hero while bitching about everyone being below him. Alright, the next one is really interesting. This ATM says Ashura do Ginkgo, or the Way of the Ashura. And first things first, doesn't this specific ATM look awfully familiar? I hinted it before, but this ATM right here is the same exact one littered across the towns in No More Heroes 3. But wait, that's not all. Again, this ATM says the Way of the Ashura. This is a world where the Ashuras dwell, a world of endless war and wrath. According to the mythos, it's a world where the fights and struggles never end. This is further emphasized by the dying hitman's words, stating this hell never ends. And no matter how many you kill, it will not end. You cannot escape.
The battle has already begun. You are in the eye of the storm, so you cannot escape or just disappear. You can only fight here. Round and round, Travis. Go round and round this hell of battle. Go round and round again.
I think Suda deliberately chose this ATM in No More Heroes 3 to hint at Travis's ultimate fate, like I suggested back in my original analysis. And I didn't even know about this blatant clue. So, I think this further confirms what I've theorized regarding the point to the story in No More Heroes 3. If this was some bought asset from the Unreal library, I wouldn't be so sure. But not only is this model original, it was used in a game built on the Unity engine. So take that for what you will. I've expressed before that Travis's adventure in the first game is a descent into this dark world that would later become his hell, something that didn't really pay off until No More Heroes 3 14 years later. This descent into hell in the form of ATMs and assassin fights turned Shiryabu into an absolute monster, much like how the ranked fights changed Travis as a person forevermore in the original No More Heroes, and how he deals with that in the sequels. But yeah, My mind was reasonably blown when I realized such a blatant connection. It's a brilliant little hint towards what Suda was going for with a game like No More Heroes 3. And let me toot the goddamn horn. I am so happy to practically find a confirmation towards what I hypothesized years after I made that huge analysis. Anyway, the third ATM reads as To-Gyorin. Steel Ball Runner thinks it's supposed to relate to To-Yorin, which he says is a special kind of hell where men are punished for crimes of lust, which doesn't relate to this ATM, but it does to the next one. The Toyoju is a tree topped with a beautiful woman, but this tree grows bladed leaves, as it's meant to inflict major pain on the lustful fool willing to climb such a tree, only for the woman to disappear and reappear at the bottom, and vice versa, making the venture completely worthless and painful, as the woman is nothing more than an illusion. At the very least, this hitman was wielding a knife. But come on, Shiryabu even posits the next assassin, the woman herself, could be an illusion. The fourth ATM only has kanji in the original game, but is cut off in the remake. Shout out to Nanami's efforts capturing the original mobile phone chapters. This reads as Cerberus Bank, the Cerberus being the legendary guard dog for the underworld in many mythos, most prominently Greek mythology. Also known as the coolest fucking design in Disney's Hercules. So cool, Square just had to use it. The fifth ATM reads Shitanuki Ginkgo, which relates to pulling out the tongue. Steel Ball Runner says there's a type of hell called Shitanuki Jigoku, where people who ever say evil words or lie to others have their tongues pulled out as torture. Getting near the end, the sixth ATM reads Naraku Zoko, which means the bottom of hell. In many mythos, it's considered to be a part of hell specifically for traitors and those that commit treason, and it's also completely frozen over. Huh. Maybe that's why the hitman is dressed so warmly. The final ATM is Shiten-zan, which is the name of the mountain between the living world and the land of the dead. From how it sounds, it seems to be a type of purgatory, where all souls must climb from one mountain to another in order to reach their destiny. With Shiryabu going through all different kinds of hell and returning to what some might call reality, he has completely transformed into this godless monster. Thinking about it, it makes sense that this is the last ATM. He went to hell, and Shiten-zan was his means of returning to the world of the living, now this odious shell of a beast. It's actually funny thinking how similar this is to Sumio's transformation in the Silver Case. At first you think this is the everyman youngin you're supposed to relate to, as the hard-boiled hard asses around him only get harder. That works, right? Much like this jabroni in a more pathetic sense, but Chapter 3 for both games reveals their true hand, a criminal monster inside them that's been festering right behind the curtains. Maybe not all that surprising coming from someone who was so obsessed with becoming a cop. Of course, what Jabroni is committing seems much darker, more sinister. There's no innocent person to avenge, no higher sense of justice against a massive corporation. This is what I mean when I say the 25th Ward feels like Suda coming to terms with the darker side of writing and creating, compared to where he was when he made the Silver Case. This is what creating Killer 7 does to a motherfucker, so to speak. The true Kuromizawa finally rears his head, and he's going to be more prominent in the chapters coming up. Much like how Kamui's spirit was able to inspire more crimes and even a sense of revolution within people dwelling in the 24th Ward, Kuromizawa's presence seems to be able to manipulate susceptible people with his influence, turning them into soulless bastards. He kind of reminds me of Kun Lan in Killer 7, actually. Oh, and one more thing. In a Reddit AMA, Suda was asked why the once real corpse of Kuromizawa had ingested human hair. All he would tell us is that it has something to do with Shiryabu not having hair. He didn't elaborate further, but I'll take a swing and think it has something to do with losing your life essence, losing your humanity to Kuromizawa. He now controls a part of you, turning you into a doll of sorts. I think back to Chizuru in the Silver Case, coming to terms with becoming a soulless Ayame figure, even calling herself a doll. She also comments like halfway through the game that she started wearing a wig. Was this because of Kuromizawa even then? Or maybe Kamui in a sense? I'm not sure, but I think there's something there. This could all relate to death filing, as we plainly saw Shiryabu perform the skill. Oh, one last thing worth mentioning, this is the only chapter in the game named after a post-punk song Suda likes, Boys Don't Cry. To add how much I'm connecting this ordeal with No More Heroes, that game itself is also named after a post-punk song Suda likes. I don't think that was a coincidence, even back in 2006 when he wrote this chapter, something like a year before that game would release. I just find that to be intriguing. Anyway, the song of the day is 1% of Monster by Mogwai. While there's no lyrics, I can dissect a little bit from the instrumentals, as this song has a chiptune angle, reminding me how this chapter is a pastiche on video games. I also think it's worth noting the most popular video on YouTube with this song features an old Fleischer cartoon called The Song of the Birds. With over 600,000 views, Suda probably uses YouTube to listen to certain songs while on his computer like a lot of us do. So I think even this cartoon reminded him a bit of Boys Don't Cry. Look, there's even a boy crying! The shortened cartoon depicts a young bird flying for the first time to the pride of their parents. The bird lands on the windowsill of a boy's room. The boy is shooting his BB gun at various targets and decides to hunt our birdie friend and even their nest. He lands a shot on the young bird, bringing them down as the parents try to revive their child. The boy is stricken with guilt as the parents' efforts seem folly. He cries, he prays, he can't even sleep, unable to cope with the act he committed as an entire family of birds grieve, taking the body of the young bird away. Only for that young bird to suddenly come to. The bird family is happy to be so lucky, but what's interesting to me is how the boy himself did not see this happy ending, left to cry alone with his guilt. And let me tell you, this boy cried too. Perhaps the boy is Shirayabu, hurting whatever he sees in front of him, unaware of what his actions are causing. But in the end, there is still some sense of hope. What will that be? I also like to think 1% of Monster also relates to Shirayabu, which I must emphasize, the game is making it clear that he's becoming a monster with his actions. So, as teased at the end of Boys Don't Cry, this is a special episode of Correctness. Even in the menu, the header gets changed to Transmitter, which was the Silver Case's main storyline title. This is because the majority of this chapter sends us back to the 24th Ward with Sumio Kodai as the character in focus. Suda commented that he would receive feedback from fans in between chapters and that it did influence how he wrote later episodes. Maybe people want to get a glimpse of old grounds, but I gotta be honest, there ain't much to see, which is probably the point. The rest of the original HCU don't make it because, most of them are bones now, but we do see a couple familiar faces. We'll get into that. The chapter starts with a recap of the 24th Ward and how it was established as an independent state, bearing a society where half are considered middle class, but a whopping 20% is considered higher wealth. While this caused major conflict between classes, the crime rate severely lowered compared to other states, and the transmission of criminality has also effectively ended, according to this. With a 200k population, the ward's mayor Tsubaki is serving his 7th term. I think this is simply emphasizing that the people seem generally satisfied with the everlasting state of the 24th Ward. However, the current HCU there seems to be losing some sort of effect. Perhaps transmittable crimes are rising again. This is Digital Man. We're following Sumio Kodai at a bus stop with a little girl named Alice next to him, and she's saying some heavy shit. Sumio doesn't seem amused, just wanting her to leave him alone. She teases him about wanting to see the person he loves, which tells me Alice knows more about Sumio than he realizes. But how? Oh, what is it, Sumio? You're suddenly not so keen with smacking up a kid? We've seen you do it before. I guess it wasn't technically him. Whatever, just go with the joke.
Next is the multiple choice quiz. An angel, a demon, and a fish got into a fight. Who won?
Huh?
Well? Well then?
Give me a hint.
Okay. 50-50.
But it's a 3-choice question.
Oh, sorry. The correct answer was they made up. Now it's time for your punishment.
Alright, you guys got all that?
Somewhat.
Oh, now they're gonna go fight Speedbuster. The bus arrives and Sumio gets on, a horrifying beast lingering behind him. The creature says he's still looking for the exit, but Sumio barely pays him any mind. The creature says he might have what it takes to face Kurumizawa. He's described as an observer, which Sumio states an observer is one that is not observed. But what does that mean? Oh, the stop is actually called End of Despair? Alright. Sumio sits next to a perfect clone. I'm not sure which one we were just following before. A demon at the edge of the 24th ward, huh? Possibly talking about Kurumizawa, who sold his despair. I guess this is the place to do it. Sounds like he's nearby as a Sumio feels his power. With that, his investigation starts as a glow of blue covers his face. Alright, let's stop for a second. This entire scene has left a lot of people completely dumbfounded, and I'm honestly part of that crowd, but I can take a few general stabbings. I think the most obvious statement is that Sumio himself is raging with inner conflict, continuing to bottle up his darkness inside. Like I said before, his actions in the silver case were all to facilitate a revenge plan he had built for years with two other friends that faced an ordeal that would leave them all emotionally and physically scarred. Their mission was to destroy this redevelopment corporation that was ruining the lives of many locals, and they succeeded. This was the Mikumo village incident in the silver case. You should already be aware of this if you've played the game or watched my previous analysis. Anyway, like I said, the Mikumo boys were meant to take their own lives in the process once their part was done. Fuyuki did, Hiseki did, but Sumio? Not quite. It's inferred that he was meant to die in the Mikumo explosion at the end of the chapter, but was under Tetsu's arrest, thus he had no choice but to see the light show from high above. He was able to see his past get washed away and see the spirit of that girl finally rest, but he wasn't able to take his darkness down with it. Sumio was not able to find peace like the rest of his friends. This darkness has been deforming and mutating for all these years, the mirror image of himself. Perhaps he doesn't really know his true self. This could also be a joke on all the Sumio clones from the previous Flower, Sun, and Rain. The little girl named Alice, possibly in reference to Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps symbolizing Sumio navigating through such a surreal world of self-discovery. I think that angle is more than valid for what he's been through in the two previous games. Maybe the depiction of a little girl is also supposed to represent a waning memory of Riru Yukimura, whose tragic death was the catalyst for this criminal mind awakening inside Sumio all those years ago. I further think this is what they were going for, seeing the monstrous entity over his shoulder. What was that line in the silver case? A chimera emerging? Now, some would argue this doesn't look like a chimera, but there's been plenty of interpretation of the creature in fiction that look nothing like the original depiction. I've seen one that looked like Natalie Portman. What are we talking about? Oh, right. Just so everyone's on the same page, and perhaps the game isn't clear enough, I think it's safe to say the doppelganger, the little girl, and the chimera are all the same entity. Like I said, this deep darkness that's deforming and mutating as it haunts Sumio from within. I could be wrong though, as there's implication that this creature has been dwelling in the 24th ward as a separate entity, already being aware of Kurumizawa. But like, maybe Sumio himself was already aware of him too. I don't know. Back to the story, Sumio is checking out some evidence with Sakura. More talk about Kurumizawa being an observer, stating they stop being such when they themselves are observed. They become conscious of the camera, as in the object that is observing. Maybe they're referring to someone that is being observed changes their behavior when they know they're being observed, which is something that commonly occurs within animal studies. The footage shows a dead girl's body with what looks like an animated character standing over her, noticing the camera. We're learning more about this deviant's nature and how he can literally change to humanly impossible forms, like a literal fucking cartoon character. November 2nd, so this is all occurring the same day as Shiryabu's ATM adventure, and we're back in the old HCU office. Nobody here except Sakura and Sumio as they decide to get the video analyzed by forensics. we see a heavily suited observer perched at the top of the city. I only know this is an observer because of the game's fucking metadata, by the way. This could also be the one that captured the footage of Kuromizawa. Sumio is at the forensics center, already reminiscing about his time with the HCU back then. A man named Kira greets Sumio as head of forensics. As he dissects the footage, we get an even clearer view of the crime scene. Unsurprisingly, Kira is also shocked from the video, as it's confirmed none of it is doctored in any way. However, he helps us with the location, Route 20. We now see what Sakura is up to, checking out a little apartment complex. Ah, just like old times. Some Melvin eventually answers their door. Ken the psycho, huh? Hey, you don't gotta be crazy to work for the HCU. But it helps. After an awkward exchange, Crazy Ken is apparently an observer. Oh, his lenses are blue. That was probably him. And then when we see a shot of him in the game, we'll get back to that. Ken says he and the rest are afraid of being observed by Kuromizawa. He claims after seeing him once, he felt like he was ripped out of his own world. He feels a sensation and ends things abruptly. Perhaps the big man lingers nearby. We're back at the scene we were teased in Chapter 3. Kuroyanagi visits the 24th Ward to talk to Sumio. It's a bit rough to say how she knows Sumio to begin with, but I guess at the very least it isn't surprising for her to keep tabs on past HCU members. She describes the feeling of being back here, which I guess she was originally a member of this ward, being a shelter kid and all. She tells him about Shiryabu's disappearance. Sumio says he'll track him down. She asks about Kusabi, who is apparently in the US at the moment. Sumio notes how the crime rate is so low now and being in this ward is so boring to him. I guess it feels like a ghost town to an old HCU member now. He seems determined to go after Kuromizawa, however, as he describes a crime with no real person to catch. He says Kuromizawa is an observer and anyone crossing paths with him is likely good as dead. That must be why Ken was so scared. He describes an observer as a human server, saying his storage system is exabyte sized? Damn, a machine in the guise of a humanistic form. Yeah, me too, Kuro. He says to think of them as enhanced humans. Sumio and Kuro are humans, but what does it mean to be a human beyond their own existence? Sumio says Kamui's DNA has spread like a virus across the 24 wards. Perhaps this explains why the 25th ward has become rampant with crime. She thinks it means Kamui's influence will grow stronger thanks to Kuromizawa, really emphasizing how Kamui stopped being a person long ago, but rather an idea. We cut to a rental warehouse with a young girl named Chiruko and... Hey, Yoshimitsu! What is up, my dude? Come on, guys, don't you remember? We walked slowly with him. They suspect this is where Kuromizawa resided, conducting observations and such. She says her ESP ability is what gives her so much insight. A sixth sense. What the... This is a direct translation, too. They keep talking about Starbucks. Was this chapter sponsored or something? Nice digs. A real minimalist. This was Kuromizawa's way of staying hidden and hard to track. Yoshimitsu asks her to use her ESP to track him, but she can't. Says they need to check out a tape in the warehouse, but the tape is his dead body, apparently. I'm having a tough time following this, but back in the HCU, they see footage of Kuromizawa in an elevator, looking very polygonal. Yeah, it do be like that. How Chihiko describes Kurumizawa here, it's clear she believes he has reached a dimension foreign to them. Haha, yeah, you're a real quirky girl. Then it cuts to what almost looks like Chihiko and Yoshimitsu staring directly at you, the player. She says there's an invisible world and an invisible opponent that the HCU must face. We go back to Sumio and Sakura, checking out the scene of the murder. Things don't seem right, but Sumio intends to find Kurumizawa right here and now. So the entire complex is just a case of trial and error. Interacting with a door tells us how close we are through Sumio. He'll say if the trail is cold or if we're getting warmer. There's a lot of goddamn doors to try though. Once we reach the right door, things feel heavy. Finally entering, we find a digital man. Hey, that's the title. That's the title of the story. Sumio questions reality itself as he sees what looks like some kind of AR projection of a pixelated man. The dude sounds very pious at the moment. He has ascended to another reality, one that Sumio cannot comprehend. He's here to observe his life weight. I believe he means his own sense of worth. When asked what he sees beyond observation, all Kurumizawa says is hallelujah, possibly just referring to an absolute sense of worship. It's almost like when one is religious and they see God, but it's not like God is actually there. You as an individual just feel it to be true. You feel that he's there. I guess he disappears as they no longer acknowledge him. Sumio says dead men tell no tales as they find a body in the apartment. Well, technically it's a body of a mannequin. I believe they're inferring that this is the same from the video, as Sumio says he was too cowardly to actually kill a real person. But shouldn't you be glad that he didn't? Maybe he's just like Kamui, where he never really murders anyone himself, it's just something he encourages through others. Back in the HCU, he says it was Kurumizawa's influence that made everyone, including himself, see the mannequin body as a human. It's like they can't even trust their own eyes now. That pretty much concludes the investigation, I guess. Sumio goes to a model room of a mansion gallery. Here he visits Ayame, you know, from the silver case. The two can't even believe they get to speak again, although he questions if this is even real. She calls this the moment of truth. Sumio, you already did that. Ayame says he can't leave. He can't do anything. She says she's living a life of peace where she is, and that she'll wait for Sumio. So, this entire scene of Sumio visiting Ayame made me think why they're showing this to us. Then I thought about how much of this chapter reads as Sumio visiting points of his past and having these demons fester inside of him. In the silver case, he quickly fell for Ayame, and throughout the game has these lingering thoughts of her. She was pronounced alive in Utsutsu, but that same chapter describes that not all the information provided is concrete or even correct. There's reason to believe she might be dead, in my opinion, but I'll elaborate during our placebo analysis. Either way, I think this visit isn't real. Due to multiple accounts of murder and child kidnapping, Ayame should still be incarcerated. So why would he go to what looks like the fucking MoMA to visit her? And a model room at that. Makes me think of a room full of mannequins or statues. He just mistook a mannequin for a real person. Just thought I'd express the dreamy feel of that scene, as I'm pretty convinced this was all just in Sumio's head. To finish the chapter, we're back at the batting cages with Kurumizawa and Shiryabu. The shooter tells him to go for Kurumizawa with all of his effort. And that shooter, Sumio. With an unleashed Shiryabu, we close the chapter. New dawn fades. While Digital Man had a high focus on Kurumizawa, the majority of this chapter is about Sumio. With Suda speaking how he was influenced by fan feedback for these later chapters, I think he just humored the idea of letting everyone see what he was doing now. After the Silver Case, after Flower, Sun, and Rain, I'm sure fans were curious about him and Tetsugoro, the latter remaining absent. So in a way, he was able to weave Sumio into the story itself and have Kurumizawa relate to the 24th Ward. Speaking of which, the 24th Ward felt so empty and lonely, dissimilar to the 25th Ward, which feels more sinister and manufactured. Like Sumio expressed, this older ward has become a ghost town. The depression really hits you when you go to the HCU building and practically nobody is there. Just two characters having a short discussion before researching something briefly and then leaving. Like, this place was bustling before with a bunch of different members, adding their own chemistry to the room while discussing cases amongst each other. Even the music made it sound really lively, you know? But even most of those folks are dead and gone. It takes more than a single Sumio and greener Sakura to liven it up again. Frankly, it reminds me of the sheriff's department in Twin Peaks. In the original seasons, the officers and civilians were always here and buzzing about something or other. I'm not sure if fun is the right word, but the atmosphere was always lively, right? Then season 3, which was 25 years later, we go back and it's dark and lonely and frankly miserable. It's the department of a dying town and they weren't afraid to show that. It's funny thinking about it since Suda is a big Twin Peaks fan, but this part of the 25th Ward was created about a decade before this incredible third season pulled off a very similar concept. Gotta talk about Kurumizawa a little bit more. While I cannot fully elaborate him entirely right now, I will say he plays this excellent piece of being both the same as Kamui, but also the complete opposite. Both have this aura that influence people into committing crimes and rebelling against the society they live in. Both abandon their body and continue to live on in otherworldly ways, and both are treated as this heinous entity that must be thwarted for the good of humanity and society. However, where Kamui is quiet and lugubrious, Kurumizawa is pious with his incessant need to wax philosophies. Where Kamui never seemed to take any sort of pleasure from people dying, Kurumizawa practically has a hunger for it. It feels like Kurumizawa so far is this entity that is obsessing over the criminal power Kamui possesses and wants to continue that legacy, but does not understand it beyond bloodlust. There's a bit more to Kurumizawa, but I'll explain further once we reach the end of the next chapter. I do want to talk a bit more about Sumio Kodai. He feels like a wandering spirit, adding to the ghost town feel of the 24th Ward. While his freedom is already confusing, I do find it interesting that he seems to be avoiding anyone in the HCU that isn't Sakura and Kuroyanagi. Why he trusts them, I'm not sure, as he never met either of them in the original game. Even so, he has a strong interest in Kurumizawa, perhaps because of how similar he is to Kamui, but he can't let anyone else, such as Yoshimitsu or Chiriko, know about his assistance. With that said, I think Sumio understood Shiryabu's nature, but tried shooting him at the end of the chapter to, in a way, disrupt the flow of death filing to prevent this Kamui-like spirit from embracing him. But spoilers, this method fails, which leaves his actions feel like they were for naught. The song of the chapter is New Dawn Fades by Joy Division. Of course, it's melancholic as fuck, love it, but let's look over the lyrics. The first verse feels like someone living with this deep regret over his place in life. I took the blame, directionless so plain to see. A loaded gun won't set you free, so you say. This makes me think of Sumio and what he went through in the Silver Case. How he was put under arrest over his actions and forced to keep living, instead of taking his own life with the rest of the Mikumo boys. So you say, as in many would say that wasn't the answer, but Sumio, deep down, does not believe that. The second verse is all about someone that's gone through a massive, psychologically damaging ordeal, and everything is weighing down on him so much he feels he's near his breaking point. It was me, waiting for me, hoping for something more. Me, seeing me this time, hoping for something else. All that sticks to me is Sumio sitting next to himself in the beginning of the chapter. Perhaps some sort of self-reflection where he wishes he could see himself differently, perhaps in a better light, but is unable to. With that said, this dwelling darkness continues to fester inside of him. What makes this sadder is that, as of 2025, this is the end of Sumio's story. We never see him again after this, and for all we know, he's just on his own with this darkness tearing him apart inside. Despite what feels like an offbeat triumph at the end of Digital Man, all I feel is sorrow for our damaged detective. It's November 11th, over a week since Shiryabu death filed. Hotoba is discussing a murder with the rest of the remaining HCU. Despite having the victim's body, further names came up with no further identification. However, Hotoba describes a lead as he feels she was connected to the divers of the Postal Federation, and even observers. Hotoba goes on about his conspiracy regarding the Federation and the Ward, which is really baffling. Either way, he thinks this could relate to Jabroni's disappearance, so we gotta go investigate the apartment again, but not before Akama tells Hotoba where he spotted Shiryabu. A politician named Miko Shiba is making a public speech about how the 25th Ward's government as an independent state needs to strive for perfection, and he says this must be done through eradication of the specter we know as the state. But what does he mean by that? The deep state, perhaps? Miko Shiba is running for mayor and pleading for the crowd's votes. He seems to be plotting something against the running mayor, but Hotoba is here to try and talk some sense into him. Hotoba's trying to convince him to come back to the HCU, but he won't listen. He says he needs more time, and that there's still a case he needs to solve to uncover the nature of Kuromizawa. Huh? I'm not arguing the logistics here. It almost feels like Shiryabu's pathetic nature and lack of dignity is more important at this moment. Now we're at the apartment complex with Kuroyanagi. She says this is where Kuromizawa planted his roots, likely referring to this as where his human corpse was discovered, as he was once the building administrator. Anyway, you're expected to go through an 80-floor apartment complex and find the right doors to interact with. As Kuroyanagi said, no hints. Being told to go through the apartment and seek out clues in the form of random dwellers reminded me of Transmitter's 5th chapter, Life Cut. In that chapter, we were going through abandoned shelters that once housed potential Kamui types, manufactured beings that would be assigned roles in controlling the society they were a part of. This further hammers that this was the point of these gigantic server-like apartment complexes. It's all about control in society. But this time, we're going through rooms that housed adults rather than children. Hey, kind of like what Nakane was alluding to. I prefer the apartment puzzle here though, in a sadistic sense. This one requires more thought instead of just following some clue symbols or do what I did and tediously walk through every single corridor. Oh, also there's a cute Easter egg. In chapter 1, your first crime scene was in room 28 of floor 75. So if you go to that room, 75028, and ring the bell, nothing happens. Hey, have you noticed the shape this entire time? Just kind of hangs around the corner, usually. When you're prompted to solve a puzzle or pick a direction, it forms as your means to make a selection. Anyway, these faceless characters claim the names that were ID'd before, and once you follow the clues, you're told to go to a specific room, 02001. The person refers to you as Kamui. We then see a postman, perhaps on a job, trying to get into a room. Apparently he feels whoever this person is breaking the rules of living in such a tightly wound society. But then... Kuroyanagi here seemed to lure out a postman in order to confirm a lead. However, as she tries to get in touch with Uehara, our one and only jabroni is here to crash the party. He basically apologizes for lagging behind so much during their investigations. I guess he did respect her and her authority, in a sense. Shiryabu says he processed Uehara, claiming he was Kamui. Perhaps that's who answered the door at the end. Maybe the whole thing here was just a trap he set up. Jabroni says he knows all, gaining the ability of observation. He seems to be embracing his role as an observer, as the radio cuts short. For all I know, Uehara really was killed at this point, but emphasizing his unimportance, the story continues on without him. We are then taken to another postman wearing the same outfit as the one before. He's very seasoned at the job, perhaps even a diver. He rambles on about how the job has deteriorated his very being, his soul. It sounds like he yearns for a place where he actually belongs. A place where this hellhole of a job doesn't eclipse his entire life. I don't know, man. Kamijo figured it out. Oh, was this just like an ad for joining the Postman? I agree, it does sound like a bummer. Maybe it's too real. We learn this postman is speaking with an ad agency to make a good campaign for their federation. Now it just sounds like he wants to spread propaganda, talking about how he wants to twist the truth and make them look more favorable. Honestly, I'm kind of lost on why we focus so much on this random person, as this doesn't really go anywhere. Back at the HCU, Hatoba and Kuroyanagi are talking about her run-in with Jabroni. She comments on how she thinks he has lost his humanity, but she wants to keep going after him. We then cut to Jabroni wandering on his own in the ward. His sole purpose is to end Kamui, an existence that only erases an existence. With that, the shell remains, like he's accepted he's lost his own soul. Deep down, he feels he can't do anything about Kamui's ever-growing influence on society, but he wants to fight either way. He wants to try eradicating the soul, the mind, the idea of Kamui, but in the end, all he can think about is his superior. Throughout this chapter, we watch Jabroni travel around various locations within the ward, talking about Kamui's methods, almost as if he's studying his history. Even so, he feels he needs to learn more to understand as much as he can. Honestly, a lot of this feels like drifting thoughts. Jabroni's just trying to find meaning in what he's looking through, like he's swimming through the subconscious thoughts of Kamui. He later tells us, the player, I assume this is what he's doing with the power of observation, is able to speak to us directly, that he has met with Kamui. Perhaps his spirit. He's standing in the center of a highway with a green line right in the middle, perhaps a sign towards the future, as a green line can typically represent the military. Shiryabu says the point of observers was to interact with Kamui, to receive his messages and have it influence the world around them. He says Kuromizawa is a surrogate of Kamui. I imagine he means that he's a substitute of sorts to the concept of Kamui. Says he inherited Kamui's will. But what even is that will? What does it mean? Shiryabu intends to find out. Between all this, we watch Hatoba confronting Kosaka at the construction site. He demands to know the truth about the mayor. Kosaka's pleading that he's not hiding anything from him, but Hatoba won't budge. That was simple? Although, Kosaka does get pretty transparent with him, saying he took this job and dropped being a detective because the memories of the 24th Ward and what he went through still haunts him to this day. Interestingly, he isn't just talking about the Mikumo case, but something else that happened after all that, after the Silver Case. A case where he first met Shiryabu. Kosaka says he saw Shiryabu as a piece of the next generation, a sense of the future. He compares him to Sumio, whom he felt was the opposite. Hatoba isn't buying it and wants the truth out of him. Exhausted from the cases, he demands Kosaka admit he's responsible for Shiryabu's corruption, for leading him to Kuromizawa's trap. He thinks this is also Mikoshiba could get killed, as he challenges the power of the higher-ups that control the 24th Ward. I assume he's talking about the likes of Elbow, but I'm not sure. Or perhaps Nakane even. Either way, Hatoba seems ready to settle things here and now as the two draw their weapons. Will Kosaka speak his truth now? He says the apartments are treated like a farm and the residents are livestock, comparing the whole system to broilers or chickens that are specifically bred for meat. The delivery men are assigned to kill anyone that is considered bad meat in a sense. This reminds me of that live weight talk from both this game and the Silver Case. He also admits that Hatoba's assertions were completely accurate, but Hatoba isn't satisfied. He wants to hear what's true in Kosaka's heart too, so he asks him who he likes. At gunpoint, he better be telling the truth. He likes Sakura. At first, I thought this exchange was strange enough to have during such an impending moment, but admitting he still has feelings for Sakura, we learned in the Whiteout prologue of the first game's remake that they went out for some time but broke up. I first thought that was weird, but realized this adds to his obsession with dwelling in the past. Something I'll talk about in the finale video, but Kosaka is one that is too obsessed with his past to ever really kill it. Even a past love, that's all he thinks about. Oh come on, Hatoba won't give his answer? What a rip. Well, I already know who it isn't. Fucking idiot. That's the last straw for Kosaka as the two finally unleash their weapons. As a flurry of bullets are heard, the conclusion of this outcome was left a mystery. For now. We're back to Shiryabu. He has reached the 25th Ward City Hall, which is on an island separated from the rest of the town. He feels Kamui and Kuromizawa are close. Entering this massive, empty building, it feels ominous. We move ahead, slowly into the mayor's office. Jabroni feels like he's been there before, but can't recall entirely. As he reaches the office, the mayor... No, he's fucking dead, you idiot. Shiryabu calls out to Kuromizawa and... That's right. He was with us this entire time. And not just like this scene. For everything. He knows all. He sees all. Jabroni swears he killed Kuromizawa, but he says killing and being killed only matters if he is willing to accept it. He'll only die if he chooses to. This all sounds like nonsense, but just stick with it for now. Kuromizawa isn't even sure why he has such power, assuming he somehow inherited it from Kamui. He says Kamui controls the blind spots, which is a way of saying he works best in the background, in a place where we cannot see him, which frankly has been Kamui for this entire game. Which is why I find it so weird that the back of the box says, Kamui is back! Like, yeah, he is, but also isn't. A strange sound emits, and Kuromizawa says he is prompted to shift and switch places with Shiryabu, ordered by Kamui. Oh, see? Shiryabu did switch places. Now he's standing where Kuromizawa was. Get it? You get it? Kuroyanagi tells him he needs to start thinking for himself, lamenting how he's spoiled like the rest, wanting everything just plainly explained to him. You better have played this game before watching this, you snotty little shit. Jabroni begs to be killed, but she won't do it. She reminds him of his job, as they're detectives first and foremost. And with that anticlimactic conclusion, the game ends with this garbage-looking credit sequence and generic-sounding music. Looks like something out of Watch Dogs or some shit. I chalk it up to Nisa, since the original game probably had text on a black screen, maybe nothing else. But if this is Ichiki's doing, then sorry. Your credit sequence in No More Heroes 2 was so much cooler. Honestly, I kind of wish this credits used the Death Valley bomb song instead, making it feel more like a definitive ending. Would have felt closer to Killer 7's end song too. Oh, but we've got some post-credit bits too. It seems Hatoba emerged as a survivor of the gunfight, and he's only got one thing left to say. I can only assume he means to say the events here may trigger an all-out war within the 24 wards as this 25th ward is coming to a close. And if one war were to occur, I'd imagine it would be against the Postal Federation, building their own army and even talking about propaganda and the like in this very chapter. Of course, that's if a sequel were ever to exist. So far, not the case. We then see Shiryabu on his own, the full moon beaming down on him, symbolic of accepting this transformation. He says there's something locked away, deep in his memory, which only finally revealed itself after this ordeal. It sounds like he has fully remembered his past, events and deaths we have yet to see. Or maybe just a cheeky implication that we unlock Chapter 6. His past lives on. Angels versus Aliens. So yeah, that was the original not-so-thrilling conclusion of the 25th Ward. Well, at least for what Suda wrote. This chapter was called ELECTRIDE. I'm not entirely sure why. Pulling a definition from some chemistry book, an electride is a special case of ionic compounds in which one or more electrons can be quantum confined in the interstitial sites of a crystal. Now, I ain't no chemist. I ain't a scientist nerd with a white coat, so this won't mean shit to me. But here's something interesting about them that I can at least kind of understand. Kind of. According to the Journal of Physical Chemistry C published in 2021, electrides can be classified in different dimensions in the world of chemistry. That includes 2D and 3D. Electrides are also often used in various electron-based applications like batteries and superconductors. From what I'm reading, electrides have a lot to do with transferring types of atoms between elements. Any chemist somehow watching me ramble about a video game for this long, please forgive my crude description, and feel free to correct me so I can look stupider. What I'm trying to get at here is that an electride relates to multi-dimensional atoms as well as the transmission of atoms, and I can't help but think about Kuromizawa regarding this, as he's been shown in both 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional spaces. He can transmit himself between entire areas. He was the goddamn shape in the corner this entire time. He's the guy we control in the main menu. Hell, he's technically the guy we control the entire game. Kuromizawa is an electride for the 25th Ward, merging dimensions together, perhaps even crossing over the real world as we were the ones making decisions and solving puzzles, technically using him this entire time. Let's keep talking about Kuromizawa since he was given so much focus in this chapter. Hell, maybe this is why we don't give Urahara an original name. We're not playing as him, but Kuromizawa. He's the main character. His influence is what it took to control the characters and have them make decisions. Also, the way they contextualize him throughout the game itself was frankly kind of mind-blowing the first time I saw it. The way that shape formed into him, revealing that was Kuromizawa literally observing the entirety of the game this whole time, it's brilliant. Also, considering that he was the one that would see everything that we saw, being the shape in the corner, it makes Crazy Ken's little ramble make more sense. He must have been that suited individual we saw for a second, so by that, it means Kuromizawa caught sight of him. It's like they said, an observer stops being an observer as soon as they get observed. That little moment must have caused something inside of Crazy Ken to change and become scared. We've discussed Kuromizawa as a character in the 25th Ward, but what does he represent now that we've seen his truest nature? An observer. But that means more than you might think if you aren't familiar with programming software, which I am not, and still am not. So this might sound just as crude as the chemistry talk, but here we go. Please don't get mad. So, from the tutorials I've watched and attempted to understand, the subject is what is being presented in the game, or software. For the case of the 25th Ward, it's the venue, the characters, the text boxes. This is all part of the game, or the world, right? And the observer is the visual object that is being used to take what is being displayed and even make decisions on what is being displayed.
The idea is that you might have a subject, you have some part that you want to display in a certain way, and you want to decouple the subject itself, for example, the display or the behavior. So common cases where you have this is, for example, a data object that you want to display, and if the data changes, you want to update the display. Or, for example, listeners that you have in many programming languages, you have a button, and the behavior when you press the button is a different part. So these are common things so that you can evolve them separately, and you can dynamically add, for example, multiple displays for the same data, or multiple behaviors, multiple listeners for the same button. We have a subject that supports attaching and detaching observers. So you can at runtime call this method and say, I am an observer, I would like to attach myself to this subject. And then the observer itself has an update method. So this is how you tell the observer something has changed.
Think of the way the shape that we've come to understand as Kuromizawa is merely decoration until it forms into the decision-making and puzzle-solving element throughout all of the stories. With the role of the observer in mind, we're meant to take this in a pretty literal sense that Kuromizawa was manipulating everything going on within our characters via the role of the observer. Within this software engineering pattern, the observer also does attach itself to the subject in regards to this as it makes changes within the subject, updating the observer as well. While I'm saying a lot of programming hoo-ha here, I think the most important thing to note is that Kuromizawa himself being known as the observer is so important to understand how much he is actually influencing the story itself through us, the player, and this reflects even more on his character and his influence in the 25th Ward. But where is Kamui if we're to take Shiryabu's word during his little monologues? It's possible he's implying that he is us, as in the player. Macro phones describe this as the player being this alien force using the omnipresent Kuromizawa making all the decisions as he serves as the HUD. However, Kuromizawa's drive rings hollow, possibly because he represents us as the player manipulating the story, so it plays out the way that we think it should, or the way it's set to. And perhaps Kuromizawa is so obsessed with killing people he thinks deserve it because that's what we're driven to think, following the heinous crimes unit, especially after what Tetsu drove into our heads all the way back in Lunatics. I think this is also why Kuromizawa can't really die. He is a part of the software and simply can't be erased. He is an element that the game cannot function without. Therefore, he doesn't believe he can die, and the game sets him to think that he is immortal. I wouldn't say he's the same as Nezu from the Silver Case, but it's a similar idea. I've already compared Kuromizawa to Kunlan, after all. Honestly, I think Kuromizawa in a lot of ways represents Suda's desire to make games that go beyond its own existence, to be more than just a piece of software you buy, play through, and then be done with. He wants so badly for it to escape its own realm and somehow transcend reality. This is similar to the concept of Darkseid, one of the most renowned supervillains in DC Comics, created by Jack Kirby. As his creator, it was peculiar that Kirby initially did not write any real history or background of the character. He was just this being of pure evil that thrived off of being evil and powerful. This lack of history made the character feel more mythological, and his totalitarian sense of ruling granted him many worshippers and followers on his planet, looking up to him as this all-powerful, invincible leader. Another interesting detail on Darkseid that makes him stand out from all the other villains, he is considered to be the same character through every single iteration that presents him, just projected through an avatar of sorts. comics, animated shows, animated movies, live action movies, they're all considered to be the same Darkseid. He is simply able to travel across different universes that are these adaptations of DC's work. This emphasizes that he's this embodiment of evil that is necessary to exist across every universe. In some of the later, more notable stories featuring Darkseid, there's a phrase of characters, including himself, that's stated throughout: Darkseid is, meaning his existence and the evil he represents is a constant requisite forever. It's a part of the universe. This, along with the concept of being one entity, being consistently the same character, adds to how he goes beyond his source, beyond comics. What I'm getting at, a lot of this makes me think of Kuromizawa. While Suda certainly is a fan of comic books, it's hard to say if Darkseid was a direct inspiration for the character, but much of how this comic book character is depicted throughout reminds me of Kuromizawa, traveling across different dimensions and different forms, avatars if you will, and being this direct influence on people as this embodiment that only endorses violence and chaos. Is that him in Killer 7 when you're making choices? I'm not sure. Perhaps in the world of the 25th Ward, perhaps even in the world of Grasshopper Manufacture, Kuromizawa is. But where does that leave Shiryabu? In a way, back to square one. A detective and subordinate to Kurinagi who, in a sense, takes him back after all his wild escapades. And what did the big jabroni achieve? Basically nothing. I like to think that despite pursuing Kamui and thinking he killed Kuromizawa for good, he brought no real influence upon the society. To me, it's symbolic that throughout his little monologues as he was traveling across the ward, they were completely barren. Places like the highway and subway station should be littered with people, but they're not. Instead, the lonely Shiryabu is talking to himself with no real audience, even going as far as to give himself compliments. No influence whatsoever. A pathetic shell of a man to the bitter end and beyond. Of course, I think another drive for the story was to finish describing what the point of the 25th Ward was. These high-rise apartments used to neatly pack as many human beings as possible. Farm animals. These limiting boxes they're trying to call home, stuffing people in said boxes for affordable pricing at the cost of any sense of belonging in a community or even a goddamn look out the window. Huddle in your hole, follow orders, and consume. It's the ultimate goal for capitalism as it manipulates the government of this newly found state. These giant buildings are designed to store thousands of people who only work, eat, and sleep. Nothing but profit margins to these higher beings, zeros and ones. And these people are all slowly losing their sense of selves in these holes they're trying to call home. This is something Suda has criticized before, back when he directed Moonlight Syndrome. Maybe that's why those people we visited were faceless, yet so standoffish and discomforted by the mere presence of you. No real room for community, just weirdos talking shit about each other. I like to think this is why we found Mayor Mikoshiba dead in his office. He intended to fight back, to thwart the state, and help the people of the 25th Ward gain some sense of identity and community, but the higher-ups wouldn't allow it. Perhaps it was Elbow that gave the order, but all that matters is he was too liable against the elites' lust for power. Like I've said before, Suda has criticized the concepts and executions of modern living in Japan, so the 25th Ward is like how he imagines it would look like when put into practice. It's all about control. But what did Mikoshiba mean by the state? It's hard to say what exactly, but all I can think of is the deep state conspiracy theory where there's a secret network of elites, FBI and CIA members that are actually controlling the political spectrum for the outcomes they desire through means of espionage and public control. This is something Suda tackled with Killer 7, so I'm not surprised this kind of thing was still on his mind while writing the 25th Ward. This is why I think they showed Mikoshiba brutally killed in his office shortly after promising to thwart against such an elite power. It was to exemplify said power. Suda has also said the 25th Ward was inspired by the idea of a new independent state being established in modern times with Japan's sensibilities. How would it be led or organized? He has also said the 25th Ward was to be treated as a social experiment of sorts, a test run to see if this kind of society can spread en masse. We're going to get more peeks into what this means as we analyze the other two sides of the whole story, and we'll talk in more detail as we go on. As for the last song title of Correctness, Angels vs. Aliens, Dawn of Justice by Mogwai. Oh crap, there's barely any lyrics. God damn it, I've been preaching so far, but am I at the end of my rope? Mostly instrumentals, the song feels like an end of a story where you're left to think about what everything meant to you. All I'm imagining is Shiryabu wandering the empty venues of the 25th Ward on his own as I hear this song. Got a new sign, said a lot today. There's a sidewalk on the motorway. When I get to sleep, then I think less. Here's the scarecrow, and he's a faith test. These lyrics pinpoint certain elements of the 25th Ward story and what it's supposed to represent, whether specific characters or not. At least I think so, as I'm showing them on screen right now. The title might be of some significance too. Perhaps it's regarding the HCU and the RA Bureau, which we haven't learned too much about yet. But it could also mean the two conflicting ideologies we've seen uttered. Save the life versus kill the life. To kill the life is to kill the 25th Ward, destroy what it represents as another attempt to liberate the people. Therefore, I would say those are the angels. Kamui aligns with said angels. And the aliens? Those that want to save the life, save the social experiment of sorts to further control societies within. Perhaps the Postal Service workers. Are they the aliens? Well, as we've discussed before, many pieces of fiction use aliens as a stand-in for demons, including Suda's own work as we saw in No More Heroes 3. And that's it. There's no epic conclusion of any sort, no final boss, and how could there be? The pawns played their roles, the elites continued with their plan, and society will keep mutating beyond what we've seen. There's a bit more regarding what happens to the ward itself after this, as Placebo goes a bit beyond where Correctness ends, and the remake added new chapters, but that will all be saved for parts 3 and 4 of this analysis video. In the end of Correctness, all I could think of is, similar to the Silver Case, the HCU are once again not exactly good guys in any sort of way. Their only duty is to uphold this fascistic sense of community in this independent state. The only one that stated he wants to stand for justice was belittled for it, and never mind the actions of individuals like Shiryabu. It makes you wonder if we're supposed to consider Kurumizawa to be an actual villain. Lots of ambiguity throughout, similar to No More Heroes. Again, there's no way he wasn't thinking about that concept while writing these stories. Even the title, Correctness, meaning conformity and social standards, just because something is considered of law or allowed doesn't mean it's morally right to do. But what do these ravenous cops know about morals? Or the postal workers for that matter? The coroners, the citizens, anyone? I don't know. Perhaps the whole thing is meant to represent the antithesis to what Suda believes. These characters are doing what they're told is the right thing to do, rather than listen to their heart. That's going to be it for part 1. Please join me for part 2 when I look over Masahiro Yuki's story in the 25th Ward that focuses on 2 black hats with their own agency. I'll catch you here next time as I analyze Matchmaker.